My name is Lin Chi. I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, and according to my official files, I was a perfectly average student. My parents ran a business in a coastal city, leaving me to live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in the south part of town. That was the Lin Chi the world knew. The real Lin Chi was currently crouching in a pile of dead leaves in the woods behind the school. I had my eyes closed and my hands pressed together in a ritual seal. I was trying to sense the spiritual energy of the universe. There was nothing. No energy, no mystical pulse, just the muggy humidity of a summer night and the distant smell of Odin soup drifting from the campus supermarket. I nodded to myself anyway. I pulled a black notebook from my inner pocket and flipped to page 37. It was covered in tiny, meticulous notes. Dates, weather, coordinates, and results. It looked like a professional lab log. I uncapped my pen and added a new entry under my training log. September 10th, slight breeze. Southeast. Spiritual fluctuations are weak, but definitely present. Normal for mortals to be unable to perceive them. I closed the notebook and sat there for a moment. I knew what people called me. A terminal case of middle school syndrome. A freak. Beyond saving. I'd heard it all. During freshman introductions, 45 students stood up and said they liked basketball, music, or gaming. When it was my turn, I stood up and told them my mission was to guard the boundaries of this world. The classroom went silent for 3 seconds. The teacher coughed and said I had a romantic spirit before telling me to sit down. Since then, I had a permanent title across the whole campus, the freshman CHUUNI. I didn't care. There were things I couldn't explain to them, like how the streetlights on the Old South Road flickered every night at exactly 2 a.m., even though the power company insisted the lines were fine, or how the security guards at the old teaching building refused to set foot on the 4th floor at night, or the 3-day power outage that hit my apartment complex every single October, from the 12th to the 14th. Not a day more, not a day less. I didn't need to convince myself. To me, these were signs of the coming spiritual recovery. My judgment was based on intuition, and my intuition was never wrong. At 9:40 p.m., the bell for the end of evening study rang. I walked against the crowd, slipping out the side door and heading toward the back mountain. The woods were a good spot. Single people didn't come here, and the few couples hiding in the shadows wouldn't bother me. I found the thickest camphor tree and sat down against the trunk. I flipped my notebook to the 3rd stage of my cultivation plan. The goal was to connect the bridge between heaven and earth and draw energy into my body. The method was daily meditation, visualizing a ball of light in my dantian. I estimated it would take 3 to 6 months. If there was no progress, I'd have to move to the school flagpole, a suspected weak point in the world's barrier. I crossed my legs and placed the notebook on my lap. I closed my eyes and adjusted my breathing. My legs started to go numb. I shifted my position. Was I facing the wrong way? The notes said to face east to catch the purple chi of the rising sun, but right now, I was facing the supermarket. I wasn't catching any chi, but I was definitely catching the scent of that soup. I was seriously considering going to buy a snack to replenish my energy when a white light exploded in my mind. Words appeared in the center of the light, sharp and clear. My heart skipped a beat. My hands tightened into fists. Lamp Genie system activated. Scanning host's mental fluctuations. Scan complete. Mental map analysis. CHUUNI concentration 98.7%. Severely exceeding limits. System compatibility test. Standard mode 12%. Emergency protocol initiated. Exclusive adaptation protocol active. All tasks, rewards, and interfaces have been localized based on host's cognitive patterns. I stared at the words in my head. My pupils dilated. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I read it again. 98.7% CHUUNI concentration. Exclusive adaptation. I slowly opened my eyes. I looked down at my hands. I was still clutching the notebook so hard the cover was creased. A calm, almost terrifyingly quiet feeling washed over me. Just as I thought, I whispered, "Welcome to the Lamp Genie system, host." I froze for 2 seconds, then scrambled to the last page of my notebook. At the top, in the largest letters possible, I had written, World Setting Summary. It was full of theories about barriers and chosen ones I'd been writing for 2 years. I skipped a line, and, with a shaking hand, wrote a new entry. September 10th. The system has arrived. I took a deep breath and looked at the sky. The moon looked brighter than usual. The clouds had a fuzzy, rainbow edge. It was a sign. The voice in my head spoke again. Newbie task issued. Task name, Element Communication Ritual. Location, Mortal Campus, Barrier Weak Point, Flagpole. Content, complete the wind contract under the flagpole. Spin 3 times and shout, "Come wind." Reward, basic wind affinity. Note, this is a transcendent ritual. Please take it seriously. I finished reading, tucked the notebook away, and stood up. I brushed the dead leaves off my pants. My legs were still numb, like I was walking on cotton, but I moved. It took 3 minutes to get to the sports field. I bit my lip, trying to suppress a smile that wouldn't stay down. My eyes were glowing. It wasn't madness. It was the feeling of a long-held theory finally being proven true. I stepped out of the shadows, the moonlight hitting my shoulders. I could see the silhouette of the flagpole in the distance, the red flag fluttering slightly. Finally, the day had come. System note, detected host's emotional state is abnormally excited. Reminder, during task execution, please be mindful of the gazes of ordinary mortals. I didn't stop. The gazes of mortals, I repeated quietly. I actually sped up. Let them look. Let them laugh. I reached the entrance of the field at exactly 10 p.m. The place wasn't huge, just a 400-meter track and a basketball court. The floodlights were on, making the court as bright as day. A group of guys were playing basketball, the sound of the ball hitting the ground echoing across the field. A few people were jogging with headphones on, and couples were scattered across the grass and the bleachers. One guy had his arm around a girl's waist, whispering to her. I ignored them all and walked straight toward the pole. I didn't know what they were doing, and I didn't care. I watched the scene unfold with a faint, almost invisible smile. I let out a quiet sigh. Mortals. A crowd of ordinary people was completely unaware, still addicted to their shallow dreams. They had no idea that beneath the surface of this world, a violent undercurrent was surging. Spiritual energy was reviving. The barriers were thinning. And I, Lin Chi, was taking the first step toward becoming the chosen one. No wonder the ancients said it was lonely at the top. I walked slowly, feeling as if I were carrying the weight of destiny, preparing to break through the gates of heaven. The sounds of the basketball hitting the court, couples whispering, and the heavy breathing of joggers felt distant, like they were behind a layer of thick glass. They were inside that glass. I was outside. Hey buddy, a little help? One of the guys playing basketball shouted. A ball rolled to my feet. I looked down at it, bent over, and picked it up. I handed it back. The guy took it, said thanks, and turned away to dribble. I stood there, watching him for a few seconds. That was probably the closest he'd ever get to the truth. The hands he just touched were about to grasp the very essence of the world. Of course, he didn't hear my thoughts. He was already jumping for a three-pointer. The ball hit the rim and bounced away. Heaven sends great missions to men only after testing their resolve. This task was the system's test. I walked along the shadows of the track, cutting through the buffer zone between the court and the grass. A couple sitting in the middle of the field sat up as I passed. The girl glanced my way, but I didn't stop. It took me 3 minutes to reach the flagpole. I stood directly beneath it. Someone on the court shouted for a pass. The screech of sneakers on the concrete echoed through the night. I looked up at the red flag fluttering softly in the wind. One star shone exceptionally bright in the night sky. I looked back down at the concrete. 3 circles. I closed my eyes and spun once. My elbow clipped the base of the pole. The metal hit my bone, and it stung. I didn't care. Second circle. My footing was a bit shaky, and the concrete was slippery. My shoes squeaked. On the court, someone scored. Good shot, a teammate yelled. The girl in the middle of the field sat up straight, her eyes following me. I felt her gaze, but I ignored it. It was normal for mortals to misunderstand the actions of the Son of Destiny. Third circle. When I stopped, I was facing the teaching building with the flagpole at my back. I stood tall, arms at my sides. My chest rose and fell slightly. Then I spoke. The words came from deep in my chest, not too loud, but enough for anyone within 30 meters to hear. Come wind. The couple fell silent for 2 seconds. The girl whispered something, and the guy laughed. A few people on the basketball court stopped to look. A jogger slowed down for a few steps before picking up the pace again. I stayed there, head tilted back, waiting for the wind. I'd imagined this scene 1,000 times. The moonlight, the flagpole, the first call of the chosen one. If this were a movie, the camera would zoom in from the ground, the strings of an orchestra building to a climax, and then the wind would howl. In reality, there was no music, but the wind came. It was weak, but I felt its shape clearly. Every branch, every swirl, every burst of speed and slowdown. It drew a clear line in my mind. I had never been able to see the wind like this before. Task complete. The words lit up in my consciousness. My chest felt full, not heavy, but like I'd just taken a massive breath. Basic wind affinity granted. The system displayed my status, spiritual perception, weak. Wind guidance, novice. I could now influence airflow within 3 meters. Physical enhancement, trace. My muscle reaction speed had increased by about 3%. I stood still, letting the feeling spread from my chest like cold water seeping out from my heart, slowly reaching my shoulders, arms, and fingertips. My left pinky twitched. I didn't control it. It was like a tiny electric shock. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the last page. Under the line, "The system has arrived," I added another. September 10th, wind affinity acquired. I closed the notebook, tucked it away, and started walking back to the dorms. "Hey buddy, what were you doing?" someone from the basketball court shouted. I turned and saw a guy holding up his phone, the screen light flickering in the shadows, spinning around and yelling for the wind. "What kind of ritual is that? Calling the storm?" I looked at him and spoke calmly. "Communication." I thought for a moment and added, "Destiny hasn't arrived yet. We'll talk when the time is right." The guy blinked, then grinned. Right, boss. Next time you call the rain, let me know in advance so I can take my clothes off the balcony." His teammates burst out laughing. One of them even doubled over. "You take the clothes, I'll take the quilts. If the admissions office finds out we have a wizard under the flagpole, maybe the passing score will drop next year." I didn't look back. I walked along the track. My phone vibrated. I checked it. Someone had already posted a screenshot in the freshman group chat. The title was "God-tier weirdos spotted at school." It was a blurry photo of me standing under the flagpole with my arms out. "Mortals, you don't know what you've missed. But I forgive you." A small gray line of text appeared in the corner of the system window. "Next task will be issued after the host masters basic abilities. Suggested training tool, a wall." I looked back at the field. The game was still going. The couple was still watching videos. The jogger was gone, replaced by a new one. None of them knew. I let out a small smirk and started walking. The wind swirled around my left wrist, circling playfully as if urging me to go back and find a wall. The phone in my pocket lit up again, but the fabric of my pants muffled the light. 3 days later, I was still deep in my training. It was 1 hour before the registration deadline for the school sports meet, but I had no idea. These last 3 days had been more fulfilling than anything in my life. I went to class during the day, and as soon as night fell, I scoured the campus for walls to train against. On the first day, I stood against the outer wall of the dorm for 40 minutes, letting the wind hit the wall and bounce back. I felt the pressure and resistance changes, then sketched a wind resistance map in my notebook. On the second day, I moved to the back wall of the cafeteria because it faced west, where the wind was more concentrated. On the third day, I hit the jackpot, a 12-meter-high wall on the north side of the library. 3 different wind currents collided there, creating a zone of wild turbulence. It was a training ground tailor-made for me by the heavens. Truly, the son of destiny has great fortune. I stood there for an hour and a half. A security guard questioned me twice. The first time, I told him I was measuring wind speed. The second time, I said I was studying structural mechanics. He looked at my black notebook and my serious face, hesitated, and then walked away. When I finally got back to the dorm on the third night, my roommate Chun-Kai poked his head out from his bed curtains. "Oh, by the way, Chi, are you doing the 100-meter dash tomorrow?" I put my notebook on the desk. "The what?" "The 100-meter dash at the sports meet. The class rep signed you up." I frowned. "When did this happen?" "That night during self-study when you snuck out to meditate. Nobody else in class wanted to fill out the form. The sports representative just pulled names out of a hat. And of course, he pulled mine. Shinkai couldn't stop snickering. Last year, I finished dead last. The rep figured since I had no reputation to lose, I could just fill the slot to make the numbers look good. Shinkai added that he just wanted to watch the chaos. He told me it was the perfect chance to test the results of my wall squatting cultivation. I stood by my desk and stayed silent for 2 seconds. I opened my notebook to the latest page, titled Wind Elemental Guidance Training Log. The notes were precise. Training progress at 30%, guidance range lasting 3 seconds, and response delay shortened to under 0.3 seconds. It needed real combat verification. I snapped the notebook shut. "I'll run," I said. "What time tomorrow?" 10:30 a.m. 100-meter heats. I tucked the notebook back into my bag. Fine. The next morning at 10:15, the stadium stands were already half full. Different departments sat in their designated zones with flags, shouting slogans, waving inflatable cheering sticks, and snacking on sunflower seeds. The athletes' march blared over the speakers. A PE teacher tapped the microphone, testing the sound. "Attention! All students participating in the men's 100-meter heats, please report to the registration area." I changed into my sportswear, black shorts, and a white t-shirt. It was the only outfit I owned that looked remotely athletic. The shirt was actually a size too big, bought last year because the extra fabric felt more like a combat cape. At the registration area, guys were stretching, pressing their legs, or jumping in place. One guy took a huge gulp of water, tilted his head back, and sprayed it out like a fountain. I stood at the back of the line, waiting quietly. A few guys in front of me turned around. One whispered, "Isn't that the guy who gave that Shinibu speech at the opening ceremony?" The other laughed. "What's he doing here? With that frame, he'll run out of breath by the 50-meter mark." The first one smirked. "Don't be like that. He's here to maintain world peace. Running is just a side hustle." Registration finished. We were split into groups of 8. I was in the third heat, lane 5. I tested my intent. Deep in my consciousness, the system window flickered. No text popped up, but I felt a current of air respond to my will. It rose from my ankles, climbed up my calves, through my waist, and settled on my back. The wind was light, feeling like someone was gently pushing me from behind. I closed my eyes and memorized the shape of the wind. "On your marks." I opened my eyes. The wind gathered behind me, waiting for the signal. The gun fired. 8 of us lunged forward. I was about 0.2 seconds slow off the blocks. I had drifted for a split second, trying to adapt to the push at my back. But once my feet hit the track, the first gust of wind glued itself to me. I accelerated violently. The runners on my sides became a blur. The headwind tried to crush me, but the trailing current surged to match it. "Wind, come!" I hissed. The airflow shot up my spine to my shoulders and split. It condensed into a wedge-shaped blade of wind in front of me, slicing through the resistance. Every bit of drag was diverted to my sides. From 30 meters to 60 meters, I tore through the pack. It wasn't just fast, it was visible. The track blurred beneath me. I left the other runners in the dust. In the freshman literature section of the stands, the crowd erupted. "Holy crap! Is that Lin Chi? Is he on something? How is he that fast?" Someone shouted that my last physical test was nearly 15 seconds. "His legs aren't even that long. He's cheating. Look at him, he's basically floating." They weren't wrong. In the final 20 meters, I intentionally lightened my footfalls. For a moment, the gale at my back almost lifted me off the ground. I had to restrain myself. Running competitions don't allow flight. I leaned forward, my shoulder crossing the finish line first. I needed 5 or 6 steps to kill the momentum. I looked back at the electronic screen. The numbers locked in, 12.4 seconds. Most of the guys in my heat were trailing at 13 seconds. Even the fastest PE major only clocked in 11.9. I had taken second in the heat. For a guy who was dead last a year ago, improving by over 2 seconds was impossible. The crowd was left with 3 theories. I had been hiding my talent, I was doping, or I had a literal cheat code. The system window lit up in my mind. Asterisk trial verified. High-speed wind traction stable. Spiritual energy consumption lower than predicted. Warning, host focus is drifting. Suggesting mental refinement. Asterisk. The progress bar in the corner ticked up from 3% to 4%. I glanced toward the stands. A cold gaze locked onto mine. On the third row, a girl in white was standing by the edge. She wasn't cheering or holding a phone. Her eyes were sharp and calm, fixed entirely on me. I didn't recognize her at all. I quickly looked away, muttering to myself about whether she was interested in me. I shook my head, capped my water bottle, and headed for the dorms. Suddenly, a bold red warning flashed in my vision. Detected large-scale abnormal energy fluctuations. Unidentified rift signal source located on campus. Coordinates: old teaching building. Host requested to maintain high alert and investigate. I froze. The old teaching building. When I first arrived, the seniors told us to avoid it, claiming it was a dangerous, condemned structure. But the first time I walked past it, I knew better. The spiritual energy there was thicker than anywhere else on campus. Page 42 of my black notebook already had a note. Old teaching building basement. Extreme spiritual density. Awaiting opportunity to scout the hidden realm. I pushed the thought aside and hurried back to my room. Monday morning arrived with the smell of breakfast and the dregs of a high math lecture. The classroom was packed. People were napping in the front and scrolling through videos in the back. Our professor, Old Wu, was 50-something and wrote on the board with the precision of a printer. He finished a formula for the Lagrange mean value theorem and turned around. Chapter 3 is abstract, he said. Remember to finish the exercises. They're due next Monday. The room groaned. I sat by the window, my textbook open, but I wasn't reading. I was thinking about that building. I had passed it again last night and stood outside for 3 minutes. My senses told me something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It didn't feel like energy was being released. It felt like something else. Before I could finish the thought, a white light flashed in my mind. A piece of paper appeared in front of me, a physical exam paper. At the top, it read, Lamp Spirit System Knowledge Temple Task. I stared at it for 3 seconds. The interface transformed into a test sheet. The multiple choice section glowed with ink that looked fresh. Which of the following spiritual energy characteristics is most likely to appear in a knowledge-intensive location? A. Uniformly diffused. B. Layered distribution, different concentrations per floor. C. Pulsating intermittent release. D. Concentrated at a single central point. I thought for 2 seconds and picked B. Layered distribution. Different floors held different categories of books. It made sense that the spiritual energy would be layered to match. I watched as a green checkmark lit up in my mind. Question 1. Passed. The second question appeared immediately. Describe your understanding of a seal. Use no less than 30 words. I didn't hesitate. I answered directly with my thoughts. A seal is just an outer shell for power. It's like a book cover protecting the pages inside. Ordinary people can only touch the cover, but those who can perceive the inner layers are the ones who actually read the pages. To me, this advanced mathematics textbook wasn't just a book, it was a sealed artifact. The exam paper cut me off mid-thought and filled the text box with my words. A line of red text appeared at the bottom. Response matches host's cognitive framework. Passed. The moment the green checkmark flashed, a large, bold sentence materialized in the center of the paper. Task details unlocked. I scanned the mission brief. Task name: Find the sealed book of higher logic. Location: Old Book Repository, Library. Reward: Logical Thinking Enhancement. Note: It is suggested that you complete your math homework immediately after finishing this task. As I pulled my consciousness back to reality, a small line of gray text flickered in the bottom right corner of my mind. Teaching mode. Active. Teaching mode. I repeated the phrase internally. I looked down at the math textbook lying open on my desk. My gaze sharpened. No wonder I had hit a wall in Chapter 3. This textbook itself was a sealed book. Someone had locked high-level logical power within it. Most people only saw the surface-level text, never the true mathematical truths hidden beneath. I stood up. My chair legs screeched against the floor tiles. A few students in the front row jumped and looked back. Professor Wu stopped writing and turned around. Is there a problem? He asked. Professor, I said, my voice calm. I need to go to the library to find something regarding higher logic. The seal on this book is too strong. Studying it directly right now is inefficient. The classroom went silent for 2 seconds. Then, someone snorted. A moment later, the entire room erupted into laughter. A seal? He said the math book is sealed. Is this guy for real? I actually believe him. I can't learn it either, so it must be magic. Professor Wu stared at me. After a long silence, he spoke. Go on then. Once you find your logical power, finish the exercises for Chapter 3 and turn them in. Understood, I nodded. I zipped up my bag and walked out. I reached the old book repository on the west side of the library's second floor. I stood at the entrance, scanning the room. The spiritual energy here was definitely thicker than outside. I couldn't exactly see it, but I felt a faint warmth on my skin. My perception was still low, but it was enough. I walked toward the third row of shelves. The system popped up a notification, target location, top shelf, third book from the left. I looked up. There was an old, dusty volume with its title nearly worn away. I could just barely make out the word higher. I stood on my toes and pulled it out. The moment my fingers touched the cover, a faint chill traveled up my arm. It felt like touching metal that had been left out in the wind. This was it. The title read, Advanced Mathematics Supplemental Lecture Notes. I flipped to the flyleaf. There was a handwritten signature, mostly blurred by ink stains, except for the last character, Lee. Holding the book, I turned to the section on the Lagrange mean value theorem in Chapter 3. There was a sample problem I had looked at 3 times before without understanding the derivation. The book had skipped the middle step entirely, simply stating, it follows from the theorem. But now, as I stared at the words, that chill in my mind felt like a key clicking into a hidden slot. Logic flowed through me like water. The gap in the derivation vanished. I saw exactly how the steps connected. So that's how it works, I whispered. I leaned against the bookshelf and flipped through the entire 3rd chapter. It took me 10 minutes. A system window popped up, task complete. Reward, logical thinking enhancement, +1. Status, issued. Note, this is a mental enhancement and does not involve spiritual energy manipulation. I closed the book and took a deep breath. The seal was broken. I tucked the book under my arm and headed for the exit, but I paused at the door to look back at the shelves. A final line of gray text appeared. Note, the old book repository contains several other items with higher spiritual residue. However, your current level is insufficient for safe contact. Exploration is recommended after leveling up. I memorized the warning and walked out. That night, I sat at my desk in the dorm. I gripped my pen and finished the last symbol of the 3rd proof on my scratch paper. I leaned back and set the pen down. Chapter 3 exercises, 3 proofs, 5 calculations, all finished. In the corner of my vision, the self-training progress bar jumped from 4% to 5%. I opened my notebook to the page titled World Setting Outline and added a new entry. September 17th, confirmed, advanced mathematics textbooks are sealed books of higher logic. Upon breaking the seal, scientific thinking is enhanced. Higher-tier sealed objects exist in the library, pending exploration. I flipped forward a few pages to my daily energy supply log. I crossed out 2 meats, 1 vegetable, and wrote a new requirement. 3 meats, 1 vegetable, plus soup. Cultivation consumes too much energy. Life remained quiet for about a week after the school sports meet. I went to class, practiced my cultivation, and took notes. People gave me strange looks when I passed them, but I was used to it. It's only natural for commoners to stare at the chosen ones. If they don't stare, you're probably too ordinary. But on the 7th day, I noticed a problem. The cafeteria food was wrong. I put a piece of sweet and sour pork in my mouth and chewed. I frowned. The flavor was there, but something was missing. Usually, there was a sense of fulfillment in the aftertaste. Item 37 in my energy manual stated that high-quality ingredients contain trace amounts of absorbable spiritual energy, which cooking converts into a form the human body can accept. The energy had been drained. I put down my chopsticks. Chen Kai sat across from me, slurping his noodles. He looked up and saw me staring intensely at my tray. What's up with you? Someone poisoned the food, I said. Poisoned? It's worse than poison, I told him. The energy density of this meal has dropped by 40% compared to last week. Can't you feel it? Chen Kai looked at his empty bowl, then back at me. He nodded slowly. I feel like I could eat another bowl. I looked at him, speechless. I stood up and took my tray to the return station. At 9:50 p.m., the cafeteria was closed. Most of the lights in the main hall were off, leaving only a single emergency light flickering at the end of the hallway. The kitchen door was locked, but there was a small window nearby with a rusted latch. It gave way after 2 tries. Using a small gust of wind to cushion my landing, I hopped into the kitchen. I stayed low against the wall. As I got closer to the source, my perception sharpened. The air grew colder. In the corner of the room, a mass of grayish-black fog shifted on the floor. It had no fixed shape. A thin, smoky tentacle reached out from the mass and touched a nearby bag of rice. The surface of the bag visibly dimmed. An energy thief, I whispered. It was a spirit entity, feeding on the trace spiritual energy in the ingredients. The amount it took wasn't huge, but over time, it made the food tasteless and hollow. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on the inner door handle, and pushed it open. The gray fog froze instantly. Then, it shattered. The mass of gray fog didn't just stay there. It exploded from a single clump into dozens of thin, wiry threads. They shot out in every direction like drops of black ink hitting water. They weren't moving incredibly fast, but they were erratic. I tracked the trajectory of those gray threads. With a swift wave of my left hand, I summoned a gust of air. The current cut across a 3-meter radius, blocking the retreat of 2 threads. Suddenly, a warning flared. A system window ignited right in the center of my vision. The text was bold, red, and flashed like a pop-up ad. Warning, Abyss Swallower detected. Threat level, calamity. Suggestion, hostage should evacuate immediately. My pupils contracted. I tensed my body, coiling like a drawn bow. A calamity class threat? I stood my ground and quickly assessed the situation. The kitchen was too cramped. I had my wind guidance within a 3-meter range and a 3% physical enhancement. I couldn't run. I had to fight. Wind, come. I whispered. Airflow condensed in my palm into a thin, invisible blade. I pushed it forward with everything I had. The wind blade sliced through the densest cluster of gray threads. Most of them were scattered by the gust, while the survivors retreated to the corner, merging back into a single mass. I lunged after it. A second wind blade followed. This time, I didn't land a clean hit. The gray fog flattened itself against the floor just before the blade reached it, sliding out of the way like a shadow. Once the attack passed, it puffed back up. I chased the thing around the storage room for 3 minutes. A thin layer of sweat broke out on my forehead. After firing 5 consecutive wind blades, my spiritual energy was starting to lag. But on the 6th shot, I saw the opening. I used a wind blade to block its right exit, forcing it to the left. To its left was a solid wall. Trapped between the air current and the brick, the gray fog was squeezed into the corner. It grew smaller and thinner until it finally shrank into a pile of pale gray granules. It looked like burnt paper ash. It sat there, silent on the floor. I crouched down, panting for breath. I stared at the remains. That was it. A calamity. I was about to give the system a piece of my mind when the white light in my consciousness started flickering again. This time, the format was completely different. Battle settlement. Customer review mode activated. A shopping interface floated in front of my eyes. Product name, Abyss Swallower, low-level spirit. Order status, completed. Description accuracy, seller described as calamity class. Actual, light-fearing low-level spirit. Logistics, timely delivery. Accurate location. Started working upon arrival. Buyer evaluation, Lin Yuan, anonymous average. Took too long. Consumed too much energy. Suggest the seller describes product levels honestly to avoid unnecessary expectations. Overall rating, 23%. Reward multiplier, x 0.7. Aesthetic bonus offset by efficiency penalty. I sat on the floor, staring at that review page for 5 seconds. Calamity? The system didn't answer. I headed for the window to make my exit. Before my feet even hit the ground outside, a hand slapped my shoulder. What are you doing? I spun around. A cafeteria auntie was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen. She held a mop and looked at me with extreme suspicion. 3 different lies flashed through my brain. I'm on a supernatural mission. No, I'm just passing by. Impossible. This window led to a dead end. I'm looking for something. My notebook fell inside, I said. The auntie stared at me. She didn't move. Her wet mop rested on the tiles, leaving a small puddle of water. 3 seconds passed in silence. Find it, she asked. Found it. The door was locked, so I used the window. She stared for 2 more seconds, then thumped the mop handle against the floor. Next time you need something, use the front door. The security office has keys. You hear me. I hear you. I walked out of the alley and didn't breathe a sigh of relief until I reached the streetlights. I looked at my palm. The residual warmth of the wind blade was still there, leaving a slight tingle. I pulled out my notebook and wrote in the first line of my anomaly log. Asterisk September 20th, cafeteria kitchen. 1 low-level spirit. Gray-black, mist-like. Feeds on spiritual energy. Cleared, asterisk. I paused, then added another line. Asterisk system named it Abyss Swallower and marked it as Calamity Class. Reality, roughly equivalent to a malnourished stray cat. Lesson, confirm target level before choosing tactics. Asterisk. That night, I drew a simple diagram in my notebook. The kitchen, the storage room, the corner. I drew an arrow from the corner to the rice bags, and another from the ceiling to the corner. It didn't lead to a conclusion, but I felt like something was missing between those 2 arrows. At the bottom, I wrote 1 word, source. A breeze slipped through the crack in my window, flipping the corner of the page. I didn't keep writing. I just looked at the diagram and tucked the question away in my mind. On Monday, September 24th, at 4 p.m., I was in the middle of my cultivation when the system flared up again. Mission: join a supernatural organization. Condition: become a formal member of a campus supernatural club. Reward: spiritual perception calibration +1. I opened my eyes. A supernatural club? I pulled out my phone and searched the school's club directory. The Paranormal Research Society was at the very bottom. The description was just 1 line. Explore the unknown. Discuss paranormal phenomena. The member count was even smaller, 8 people. I hit join. I was accepted in less than 3 seconds. The group announcement was brief. Meeting this Thursday. Usual time, usual place. Bring snacks. Thursday at 7 p.m., I found the spot. It was a classroom at the far west end of the 3rd floor in Building B. When I pushed the door open, 5 people were already there. The main lights were off. Only a small desk lamp on the podium was lit, casting dim, amber shadows. The table was covered in chips, 2 bottles of cola, spicy strips, and a box of old dried mangoes. A girl was speaking at the podium. She looked up when I entered. New guy? Hi, I'm Lin Yuan, freshman, literature department. Take a seat. We're discussing our next activity, Wang Yu said, waving me toward the others. I sat in the second-to-last row and raised my hand. President, can I ask a question? She looked over. Go ahead. Does this club ever do field research? The room went quiet for a moment. Wang Yu stared at me. Field research. Like visiting rumored spots on campus, I added. Old buildings, things like that. Wang Yu blinked. Are you serious? Very serious. Wang Yu exchanged a look with a girl wearing glasses next to her. The girl whispered something about the new guy being interesting. Wang Yu turned back to me. It's not impossible, but we have to agree on the rules first. If we go, don't get scared. And when we get back, don't spread rumors. I won't. Fine. Next Wednesday night, then. We'll check out the old office building in the East District. I heard there's been noise there at midnight. She checked her phone calendar. It's settled. Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Meet at the East District entrance. I nodded. Got it. Back at the dorm, I opened my notebook and added the Paranormal Research Society to the list. I drew a line under it and wrote, usable. After a moment of thought, I added more notes. Asterisk loose structure. Easy for independent action. All 6 members lack spiritual perception. Needs further observation. Asterisk. I closed the notebook and turned off the lights. In the darkness, I heard the wind whistling outside the window. It might have been my imagination, but the sound felt thicker than it had last week. Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. I arrived at the East District entrance to find 3 people already waiting. Wang Yu had a backpack on and was using her phone as a flashlight. Beside her was the girl with glasses, Zhou Lin. The group was finally all here. There was a sophomore from the accounting department, and a freshman I hadn't met before named Lu Chong. He was a mechanical engineering major who joined the club because he wanted a thrill. Wang Yu counted heads. All right, she said. Let's go. The old office building sat right behind Building 3. It was a desolate place. It used to be the physics lab back in the 90s, but it had been abandoned for decades after the department moved out. As we approached, I realized it looked better than I expected. It was a 3-story structure with gray brick walls, though most of the windows were shattered. The main entrance was chained shut, but the side door's lock was broken. It swung open with a heavy groan. Wang Yu paused at the threshold. She turned back, her flashlight casting long, jagged shadows across her face. Last chance. If you're scared, wait at the door. We're going down. Down? Someone whispered. There's a basement, Wang Yu said. It used to be a warehouse before it was abandoned. People say they hear rhythmic tapping coming from down there at midnight. I stood at the back of the line and immediately activated my wide-area perception. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The spiritual energy inside this building was on a completely different level than the air outside. I took a silent breath in the dark. My perception was screaming at me. The strongest source of energy was directly beneath us. We reached the stairwell. Wang Yu's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing concrete steps with rounded, worn edges and railings buried under thick layers of dust. Are we really doing this? Zhou Lin's voice was tight with nerves. We're already here, Wang Yu replied without looking back. I followed the group down. It wasn't a long walk. 13 steps led to a landing that turned toward a heavy iron door. A rusted padlock hung from the latch, but it wasn't actually locked. Wang Yu slid it off and pushed. The door creaked open with a piercing metallic shriek. The moment it opened, my precision reading activated. Within a 3-meter radius, the spiritual energy became so dense it was almost tangible. It was stronger than the spirit I had encountered in the cafeteria kitchen. I froze at the doorway. My eyes pierced the darkness, landing on the center of the far wall. About 5 feet off the ground, I saw a blurred, flickering outline. I didn't move any closer. Wang Yu poked her head inside and looked around. Nothing? It just looks like a normal warehouse. Zhou Lin grabbed Lu Chang's sleeve, her voice trembling. Can we go back up? It's freezing in here. I lingered on that word, asterisk cold star. It was a physical reaction to high concentrations of spiritual energy. The gray mist in the cafeteria had been cold, too, just less intense. I pulled my gaze away from the wall and followed the group back upstairs. Once we reached the exit, I waited for the others to step out first. I took one last look at that side door. Suddenly, my system window flared to life, but the interface was different than anything I had seen before. Usually, it gave me white pop-ups, exam papers, or shopping reviews. This time, the words floated in my mind like calligraphy on rice paper, arranged in neat rows of 5-character verses. Shadows drift where time is thin, the spirit fades, too weak to win. Should the host meet evil's trace, the wind shall rise to meet its face. I stared at the poem for 3 seconds, then nodded. It made sense. A place rich in spiritual energy would naturally trigger a more refined response from the system. A small line of gray text appeared at the bottom. Note: local spiritual energy has reached the literary flow threshold. System has switched to poetic expression mode. Mission content remains unchanged. Only the format has been adjusted. Poetic expression mode, I muttered to myself. I pulled out my notebook and added a new entry under my system status. September 24th. New system state, poetic mode. Trigger, high spiritual density. Format, classical verse. Initial impression, highly compatible with cultivation themes. I closed the notebook and started walking back to the dorms. After a few dozen paces, the system chimed again. Detection, perceptual behavior in ancient structures has reached the training threshold. Autonomous training progress, 7%. I stopped to process this. It had only been 4 days since my last level up. This progress wasn't coming from combat, but from active observation and deep investigation. I mentally organized what I had learned about the basement. The energy was stronger than the cafeteria spirit. It was located on the north wall, and it was stationary rather than mobile. It was stronger than a common spirit, but far below a boss-level threat. It was likely a residual seal or a natural accumulation. I tucked my pen away as I reached my building. I looked up at the windows of Building 3, my mind already planning. I'd have to go back to that basement alone in a few days. The next morning, the system issued a new task, a social mission titled Building Bonds. I had to engage in deep communication with 3 different individuals to establish trust. Progress 0/3. Note: bonds are a necessary condition for growth, not an option. I considered my targets. My roommate Shinkai was the obvious first choice, even if he just thought of me as the weirdo who stares at walls all day. We had a foundation of trust from living together. Second, I could pick someone from the Research Society, Wang Yu, Zhou Lin, or Lu Chang. As for the third, an image flashed in my mind. The girl in white I had seen at the sports meet, standing on the 3rd row of the bleachers. She had watched me the entire time, and her gaze wasn't just curiosity. I wrote unknown in my notebook for the 3rd slot, then crossed it out and changed it to pending. The bell rang, ending class. I walked out, thinking about the scheduled power outages at the Tsue housing complex. Every year, the power went out for the same 3 days. The official reason was summer grid overload and maintenance. But I wondered, what if the blackout wasn't a technical issue at all? I pushed the thought aside and headed toward the small woods on campus. It was a clear night with a half moon and a light breeze from the south. I found my usual spot by the old camphor tree and sat down, leaning my back against the rough bark. I flipped to my ability status page. Spiritist can perceive spiritual energy, location, and concentration. Asterisk wind guidance can manipulate air within 3 meters. 1 wind blade exhausts all reserves. Poor endurance. Asterisk. I closed the notebook and shut my eyes. I let my wide area perception spread out. It was stable now, covering a 30-meter radius without me even trying. It felt like a background hum, like ears always listening to the environment. I narrowed my focus, switching from wide area to precision. 5 meters. I reached out with my mind, touching the air within that circle. Then, I opened my eyes. My pupils drifted and then snapped into focus. The invisible currents of air were no longer invisible. In my vision, they appeared as faint, silken threads of pale blue. They flowed from south to north, tangling, crossing, and separating like a glowing web woven right in front of me. I could finally see it. My voice was quiet, as if I were afraid of waking something up. I sat under the old camphor tree, staring at the wisp of pale green wind dancing on my fingertips. I watched it for a long time. Before tonight, I only knew the wind was moving. Now, I could actually see how it moved. It felt like a thin veil had finally been torn away. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to a fresh page. I wrote, September 28th, night. Qualitative change in spirit perception. First visual observation of spirit flow. Color, pale green. Form, silken threads. Layered. Ground flow is slow, upper flow is fast. Note, this is direct visual data, not imagination. Just as I was about to close the book, the system window popped up. This time, it was a full status panel. Host Daily Summary, September 28th. Spirit Reserves, 43%, normal fluctuation. Physical Fortification, 3%, no change. Training Progress, 8%, plus 1%. Shinibu Concentration, 97.3%, plus 1.4%. Narrative Tension Index, 7100, low. The system noted that things were currently too peaceful and suggested I seek out more dramatic events. It wasn't a mission, and there was no reward. The system just seemed bored. I also noticed a new stat, translation delay, 2.1 seconds. I stared at the screen. My Shinibu concentration was at 97.3%. I didn't even know the system was measuring that. And the tension index was low. I wanted to argue, but I realized it was right. Lately, my life was just classes, training, the cafeteria, and fighting one weak spirit. It was dull. The translation delay bothered me more. I realized that every time I perceived spiritual energy, the system took 2.1 seconds to translate it into information I could understand. In a real fight, 2 seconds is an eternity. It was a weakness I had to fix. I flipped back to my world settings page. I looked at the things I'd written before, cultivation plans, chosen ones, the spiritual awakening. When I wrote them, I felt so certain. But now that I had seen the real thing, those words felt clumsy. Unprofessional. I wrote a new line at the bottom. Asterisk spiritual entities confirmed. Colors: pale green, gray-purple, dark gold. Form: silken threads. System delay: 2.1 seconds. Effects reaction speed. Need solution: asterisk. I paused, then flipped to another page titled Daily Energy Supplement Recommendations. It currently listed 2 meats, 1 veg, and soup. I went silent for a second. Then, I uncapped my pen and neatly crossed it out. I replaced it with new plan, 3 meats, 1 veg, and soup. My spirit reserves were only at 43%. My training was burning through energy faster than I could replace it. I needed more protein. The logic was sound. I checked the date on my phone. September 28th. As I walked back to the dorms, my mind drifted back to the CHUUNI housing complex. The blackout was scheduled for October 12th. I had 2 weeks. I stopped in my tracks and opened the notebook again. I found the map of local anomalies and drew 2 heavy lines under CHUUNI complex. Underneath, I scribbled, asterisk 14 days until October 12th blackout. Must conduct field recon in advance, asterisk. Back at the dorm, I shut the door and sat in the dark. A sliver of light from the street lamp outside cut through the curtains, landing right on my notebook. I stared at that 14 days note for a long time. I flipped to the next page and wrote down 4 goals. 1. Find out what that dark gold energy in the old office basement is. 2. Shorten the system's translation delay. 3. Find the link between the blackout and the spiritual energy. 4. Why October 12th? I closed the book and lay down. A thought kept echoing in my head. If the blackout wasn't a technical fault, and it happened every year on the same day, it meant something was waking up. I stared at the ceiling until I forced the thought away. I needed sleep. I had class tomorrow. October 12th arrived. Saturday, 7 p.m. I was sitting on the sofa in my family's apartment at the CHUUNI complex. The lights were off. I had arrived earlier that afternoon, telling my friend CHUUNI that I was just heading home for the weekend. I wasn't waiting for the sun to set. I was waiting for the power to die. Every year on October 12th, at exactly 8:40 p.m., the grid went dark. The property managers called it maintenance. They'd been doing the same maintenance for 3 years. Same day, same minute. I didn't believe in coincidences. At 7:30 p.m., I walked to the window. The street lamps were still glowing orange. Old men were playing chess by the flower beds. Kids were riding bikes. Everything looked normal. At 8:20 p.m., I changed into a black hoodie. I stood in front of the full-length mirror for a moment, pulling the zipper up and flipping the hood over my head. I turned sideways, checking my silhouette in the faint reflection of the streetlights. It looked good. I looked like a threat. I sat back down and waited. At 8:40 p.m. sharp, the lights in the opposite building vanished. The street lamps died. I heard a collective "oh" from the old men outside, a sound like a stone dropping into a deep well. Then, silence. The entire complex felt like someone had hit the pause button. Darkness rushed in from all directions. Only the distant headlights from the main road occasionally flickered against the walls. I stood up, my spiritual vision wide open. The world was no longer just a web of pale green wind. Something else was coming. It was black, a heavy, oily black, like ink dripping into clear water. It was flowing in from the southeast. My wide area perception caught it. The mass of black energy was moving toward my building. It wasn't fast. It moved at the pace of a person walking. I didn't move from the window. My wind guidance was already primed, air currents swirling steadily around my left wrist. I waited for it to get closer. 15 meters. 10 meters. 5. The moment it entered the 5-meter mark, I switched to precision vision. I saw its shape. It was about half the size of a man, an irregular, floating mass made of what looked like jagged, grayish-black shards. Every shard was vibrating. Around the edges, there was a faint, sickly purple glow. Gray-purple. I remembered my notes. Spirit type entity. A system window exploded into my field of vision. Warning: shadow invader detected. Threat level: medium. The system advised me to prepare for battle immediately. The target was a low-level demonic entity with the ability to devour spiritual energy and restructure its physical form. Its weakness was for me to figure out on my own. A small note at the bottom warned me that this thing was nothing like the spirit I fought in the cafeteria. I needed to stay sharp. I stared at the warning, but I didn't feel fear. My eyes lit up with excitement. It was finally here. Back in the cafeteria kitchen, I had struggled just to land a hit. But this was different. The system didn't call this a calamity anymore. It labeled it medium. I felt like the system finally had my level right. This was a real enemy. "Let's go," I whispered. I turned toward the door. As I passed the full-length mirror, I paused. I tilted my head, looking at my silhouette under the black hat. I locked eyes with my reflection for a second, then turned slightly to find a more intimidating angle. I lifted my chin just a fraction. The night watchman was heading out. I pulled the door open and stepped into the hallway. It was pitch black. The voice-activated lights were dead. My footsteps echoed through the narrow stairwell, sounding much louder than usual. When I reached the ground floor, I pushed open the heavy unit door. The world outside was swallowed by deep shadow. The street lamps were all out. The moon was nearly full, but a layer of dark, thin clouds veiled its light. Visibility was terrible. I stood on the steps and expanded my spiritual vision to its maximum range, 50 meters. The mass of black energy was moving through the gap between Building 12 and Building 13. It was headed toward Building 3. I quickly mapped out its path in my head. It would pass right by the side of the building toward the north gate. I could flank it. I moved fast, sticking to the shadows of the green belt along the side of the building. My feet crunched on fallen leaves, but the sound felt muffled to me. When my spiritual vision is running at full capacity, it eats up a lot of focus. The world gets a little quieter. I stopped at the corner of the building and peered toward the path. The thing entered my sight. Within my spiritual field, its form was clearer now. It was a half-human-sized silhouette of grayish-black. Those shard-like structures on its surface were constantly flowing and rearranging themselves. Every shard pulsed with a slow, sickly purple light. It moved slowly, like it was patrolling or searching. The air felt thick and sticky around it. As it passed, it sucked the spiritual energy right out of the air, leaving a void behind it. It was eating. It was doing exactly what the spirit in the cafeteria did, but on a much larger scale. That one was just sipping. This thing was feasting. I crouched behind the corner and slowed my breathing to a crawl. I waited for the system to give me a prompt. It did, but not with a standard window this time. It appeared as a menu. It looked like a folded sheet of beige paper with a vertical title. Genie System, Today's Mission Menu. Issue 37. Today's Recommendation, Shadow Sweeper. Spiciness, mild. Ingredients, 1 patroller, 1 low-level spirit. Estimated cost, 15% spiritual power, 20% stamina. Combo deal, includes a reward and a gift. Hidden menu, unlock at narrative tension index 85 or higher. Allergy warning, this system contains high levels of CHUUNI. Use caution if allergic to dramatic flare. I finished reading the menu while crouching in the dirt. The system was getting more organized by the day. It even had a menu now. I glanced at the allergy warning and my lip twitched. I shook it off and focused. It didn't matter if it was a menu or a pop-up window. As long as it gave me the mission, I didn't care about the format. I just saw it as the system becoming more professional. I took a deep breath, stayed low, and crept along the edge of the bushes. I wasn't going to charge it head-on. I wanted to get close from the side and observe first. The gray-black mass stopped near the base of a street lamp. It stood perfectly still, as if it were listening. I switched my vision to the 5-meter precision mode. I saw more details. Those shards weren't random. They were layered like fish scales, and each edge was lined with tiny purple veins. All those veins converged at the center of its torso. That area was darker than the rest, glowing like a dark purple core. That's the heart, I thought. I locked that image in my mind. I stepped back, circled around a sweet-scented osmanthus tree, and closed in from the flank. I got within 4 meters. Suddenly, the thing jerked. The entire silhouette whipped around toward me. It was faster than I expected. I lunged to the left by instinct. A gray-black shard grazed my right arm. It didn't touch my skin, but a wave of biting cold pierced through my sleeve. It felt like being touched by a block of dry ice. As I dodged, I threw a wind blade with my left hand. I compressed this one thinner, like a long, narrow scalpel. It sliced into the edge of the mass, but only sank in about 2 inches. The shards on the creature's body vibrated violently, and the purple veins flashed faster. Again, I muttered. I backed off to create space and charged my left hand again. I fired, but the creature didn't wait for me this time. Its entire form collapsed, like a pile of blocks losing its foundation. The shards scattered toward the ground and instantly reformed. It happened so fast my naked eye couldn't even track it. Blink, the word flashed in my mind. My second attack hit nothing but air, slamming into the metal pole of a street lamp with a loud clang. The creature reformed about 2 meters to my right and lunged. I barely had time to throw my right arm up across my chest. A massive force slammed into me. I was thrown back 2 steps, my back hitting the stone edge of a planter. It hurt, but my spiritual vision was still active. In the moment of impact, I saw something. I saw how the shards moved. When it blinked, the shards scattered, but they all followed fixed paths to regroup. It was like a crowd at a train station, everyone coming from different directions, but heading for the same gate. That gate was the dark purple core I had seen earlier. During the blink, the core stayed suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. I had caught the window. It was tiny, but I saw it. A system window flared to life in my vision. It was different. The words looked like they had been carved by a knife. Asterisk 3 meters to the left. Spirit type. Blinking. Window, 0.3 seconds. Strike. Asterisk. I rolled off the edge of the planter and scrambled to my feet. A third wind blade was already forming in my palm. My spiritual reserves were getting low. The creature reformed 4 meters away, its purple veins flashing even faster now. It was preparing for another blink. I stared at it, my eyes locked onto the center. 5-meter range. High precision. Every ounce of my focus was pinned on that dark purple core. The creature's form began to collapse again. The shards exploded like black ink, scattering in every direction. My spiritual reserves were dangerously low. My mind was working at high intensity, processing every frame of movement as if in slow motion. I watched the moment the fragments dispersed. There it was. The dark purple core was exposed to the open air. It didn't scatter with the rest of the body. Instead, it hung suspended in space, about the size of a palm, before it began to contract. I counted the seconds in my head. 0.3 seconds. That was my window. After 0.3 seconds, the shards would pull back together and cover the core again. It had to be now. I thrust my left hand forward. I channeled my remaining energy into a third wind blade, compressing the edge to its absolute limit. The blade whistled through the air, threading the needle between the swirling gray-black fragments. It struck true. A soft cracking sound echoed, like a needle tapping against an eggshell. The shards that were rushing to regroup suddenly froze. Like beads on a broken string, they began to drop one by one. They hit the ground without a sound, dissolving into fine, dark dust. The entire process took 3 seconds. When it was over, only a small pile of ash remained on the pavement. I stood there, my hand still extended. I slowly pulled it back. My palm felt numb and tingly. My spiritual energy was completely tapped out, and my legs felt like jelly. I sank into a crouch and poked through the pile of ash. Inside the gray dust sat something the size of a fingernail. It was dark purple and translucent, with tiny, intricate patterns etched onto its surface. A Yao core. I picked it up. It felt ice cold in my grip. I gave up on standing and sat right down on the grass by the planter. I looked up at the pitch-black sky. My spiritual vision was still active. I could see the pale green Binet, energy flowing slowly above me. But then I saw something new. A color I had never encountered before. A thin silver line shot out from the top of my head. It pierced through the green energy net, pointing straight into the deep night sky. I stared at it for a long time, wondering what it was. The system window flickered into view. Combat ended. Shadow Stalker cleared. Mission completion, 100%. Target eliminated. Yao core recovered. Spiritual energy consumption, 78%. Physical exhaustion, 85%. Suggested action, immediate rest and carbohydrate intake. Then, a line of text appeared that I had never seen before. Existence confirmation, 73%. 100%. Note: host's cognitive state briefly overlapped. Existence reconfirmed. I stared at that 73% figure. Was that the system's data or mine? I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing. In that moment when the silver line shot out of my head, I had felt the system. It wasn't just a window in my eyes anymore. It was a direct contact. It felt like two people in a room separated by a wall who suddenly heard each other breathe. Then, the wall closed again. The silver line vanished. The system didn't explain. It just displayed a small notification. Spirit vision upgraded. New ability, microscopic structure reading. Autonomous training progress, 9%. I sat on the ground, flipping the Yao core over in my hand. The dark purple light swirled slowly beneath its surface. Those tiny patterns looked like a mix of ancient script and geometric designs. I squeezed the core in my palm and used my knees to push myself up. My legs were weak, but I could walk. I went back to my apartment and didn't bother with the lights. I sat on the sofa and placed the Yao core on the coffee table. Its purple glow stained the dark room with a faint, eerie light. I opened my notebook and began to write. October 12th, 11:37 p.m. Asterisk target eliminated. Confirmed name, Stone Dream Demon, low tier, asterisk. Ability, Shadow Transformation. Asterisk weakness, 0.3 second regrouping interval. Core exposure, asterisk. Kill method, precision strike on core. Loot, Yao core X1. I paused, then added a new section. Asterisk system status. Switch to utility mode during combat. Short, punchy sentences. Maximum 5 words per line. Precise and unadorned. Note: this mode activates automatically in emergencies. Worth noting for future battles. At the very bottom, in tiny letters, I wrote, asterisk existence confirmation fluctuation, 73%. Check later, asterisk. I closed the notebook and tossed the core into a drawer. I grabbed a glass of water in the kitchen. My phone read 11:51 p.m. There were 2 days left until the scheduled power outage. I had cleared this thing, but would there be others tomorrow? I looked out the window. The neighborhood was still drowned in darkness. No street lamps, no lights in the opposite building. The green energy in my vision had returned to its normal density, as if the battle had never happened. I lay down on the sofa, pulled my coat over me like a blanket, and closed my eyes. The next morning, Sunday at 8 a.m., I sat up and rubbed my eyes. My first instinct was to check the coffee table. The Yao core was still there. In the daylight, the purple glow was muted, looking more like a piece of dull, grayish-purple sea glass. I picked it up. It was light, lighter than a ping-pong ball, and cold to the touch. With the sun up, I could see the patterns more clearly. They weren't random cracks. They were a system. Yesterday, I was too tired to look closely, but now, with my upgraded spirit vision, I saw the truth. These lines weren't part of the core's growth. They were engraved. My finger faltered. I tilted the core to catch the light. Through my spiritual sight, the edges of the lines looked sharper and more regular than the core's natural texture. It looked like someone had used an incredibly fine needle to draw on it while it was still soft. The lines had a clear direction. 3 main veins spreading from the center at near-perfect angles, with secondary branches ending in tiny dots. It looked like a diagram or a language. "This isn't natural," I whispered. I sat back and placed the core in the center of the table. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and began to sketch. My first few strokes were off. The lines were too fine for the naked eye to track, but my spirit vision kept me steady. I could see the exact depth and position of every mark. It took 20 minutes to finish the drawing. I held up the notebook. It was ugly. The lines were shaky and the proportions were slightly off, but I had captured the structure. Under the sketch, I wrote, asterisk Yao core surface patterns. Non-natural. Suspected man-made engraving. Purpose unknown. Source unknown. Asterisk. Just as I finished the sentence, the system window flared to life. The system window flared to life, but the content made me freeze. I had submitted a new entry based on the patterns I sketched, but the matching result came back empty. No corresponding record found. The target entry was labeled as Yao core surface patterns, man-made, but the status showed insufficient data/conceptual mismatch. I stared at that line for a long time. The system had never acted like this before. I had started to believe it was omnipotent, a walking encyclopedia of the supernatural. But this time, it did nothing. It wasn't hiding information from me. It genuinely didn't know. I realized then that the system's translations were based on my own cognitive framework. If I recognized something, the system could translate it. If it was beyond my understanding, the system was blind too. The problem wasn't the system, it was me. I lacked the fundamental concept for whatever these markings were. I looked at the shaky sketch in my notebook again. It's fine if I don't recognize it now, I thought. I've recorded it. I drew a thick underline beneath the words man-made engraving and added a large question mark next to it. I'll figure it out eventually. I snapped the notebook shut and tucked the core back into my drawer. As I stood up to stretch my aching neck and shoulders, I felt a subtle shift in my body. My perception of the air around me had changed. The system window flickered again. I had gained a new attribute, shadow resistance, trace amount. The notification explained that due to my contact with the Dreamtime 11 spirit core, my body had developed an adaptive response. My tolerance for dark attribute spiritual attacks had increased by 5%. Cumulative, the screen noted. I nodded, feeling a spark of satisfaction. I opened my notebook to my status page and added a new line. Shadow resistance, trace, 5%. Source, Dreamtime 11. By the afternoon, the property management office sent someone over to announce that the power repairs were finished. Electricity was expected to return by 7 in the evening. I stood at the base of Building 3, watching the technician fiddle with the electrical box. I kept my spirit vision active. The spiritual energy around the box looked perfectly normal. The blackout really was just a blackout. But that didn't stop the questions from swirling in my head. Why did the Dreamtime spirit choose this specific neighborhood? Where did it come from? And most importantly, who carved those lines on its core? Someone had marked it. Someone might even be controlling these things. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. I pulled out my phone and messaged CHUUNI, telling him the power was back and I'd be returning tomorrow. He replied with a simple got it emoji. At 7 o'clock, the lights of the CHUUNI neighborhood flickered on in rows, like someone flipping tiles on a massive game board. Watching the world brighten from my window felt like surfacing for air after being underwater all night. I cracked the window open. The wind rushed in, smelling of damp earth. The isolation was over. I turned to the world settings page of my notebook. Under the entry about the annual 3-day blackout in October, I added, *cause unknown. Related to spiritual anomalies. Low-level entities appear during this period. Spirit cores show signs of man-made engraving. Investigation pending, *. I flipped to the page with the rune sketch. In a smaller font, almost like a whisper to myself, I wrote, where have I seen this before? It looked familiar, but the memory stayed just out of reach. While I was lost in thought, a new system window appeared. This one was different. It didn't pop up. It slid up from the bottom like a piece of parchment. It was off-white with elegant script at the top. Thank you for purchasing Soul-Shattering Roar, Basic. Please read the following instructions. I blinked. A product manual? That was a first. I leaned back and started reading. This Soul-Shattering Roar was a sonic attack, a spiritual resonance ability. It operated between 120 and 250 Hz with an effective range of 3 to 5 meters. It had a 120-second cooldown. The warning at the bottom was blunt. Continuous use may cause vocal cord damage. The system is not responsible for medical expenses. Then came the user guidelines. To trigger it, I needed a specific activation word. The system suggested I find something with personal style, explicitly advising against using hello or goodbye, as they could lead to unpredictable results. The disclaimer at the end was even weirder. It stated the system wasn't liable for property damage, including shattered cups, windows, or roommates' eardrums. It also refused responsibility for damage to personal image, specifically mentioning being filmed or turned into an emoji. I stared at the word emoji for 3 seconds, then sighed and put my pen down. Soul-Shattering Roar. Sonic attack, I wrote in my log. 120-250 Hz, 3 to 5 meters. 120's cooldown, *. I looked at the requirement for an activation word. I needed something punchy. I jotted down a few options. Asterisk went. Blaze. Break. He. Asterisk. I crossed out he and break. They didn't feel right. I settled on blaze and underlined it twice. Let's try that first. I stood up and made sure the windows were tightly shut. I took my water cup and placed it on the far left of the desk. Then, I walked to the opposite side of the room, faced the wall, and took a deep breath. I cleared my throat and shouted, Blaze! My own voice rang in my ears, making them buzz, but nothing happened. The cup didn't even tremble. The window didn't move. The wall didn't budge. The only thing lingering in the air was the fading echo of my own voice. It didn't work. I took a moment to think, then flipped back through the system manual to the section on the soul-shattering roar. It mentioned a specific battle cry. A specific battle cry. I stood up again. This time, I didn't use my throat. I focused on my chest, right at the core of my spiritual energy, and pushed a breath upward. I activated my spirit vision to track the flow. A faint stream of spiritual power rose from my chest, traveled up my windpipe, and gathered at my throat like a small, glowing orb waiting to be launched. I opened my mouth wide. This time, it felt different. The spiritual energy surged out along with my voice. An invisible ripple distorted the air in front of me. When it hit the water cup on the desk, the glass trembled violently. A tiny crack appeared on the rim and spiderwebbed downward. A small shard snapped off and clicked onto the table. Water began to leak through the gap, tracing a thin line across the wood. I stood there staring at the broken cup for 2 seconds in silence. The power was immense. I quickly stepped forward to steady the cup, but the water kept leaking. I grabbed a paper towel to soak it up, then sat back down. I opened my notebook and wrote with extra care. Soul-shattering roar memo. First release successful. Result, shattered glass. Power, above average. Control, acceptable for now, but needs practice. Activation word, break. Note, must push spiritual energy from the chest. Pure vocal force is useless. I thought for a second and added a third point. The word break works, but it lacks personal style. The system wants something unique. I'll keep it for now. I closed the notebook and looked at the shards on the table. The system window flickered to life with a standard notification. Soul-shattering roar, basic, activated, and verified. Initial assessment. Activation word match, 73%. Spiritual energy efficiency, 82%. Target destruction, qualified. Overall rating, B. Note, host is advised to optimize pronunciation intensity and timing to increase the power ceiling. I added the rating to my notebook. I stood up and stretched my shoulders. That single roar had drained a significant amount of my energy. But as I moved, I noticed a change. The spiritual flow inside me felt smoother, like a 3-meter-wide river had been widened to 5. It had expanded. It grew, I whispered. The system immediately updated. Energy consumption increased slightly, but overall efficiency improved. I raised my hand to test it. I generated 2 points of airflow at once. One 2 meters to my left, the other 4 meters to my right. I could control both. It wasn't perfectly precise yet, but they both existed at the same time. I nodded and updated the data in my notebook. Asterisk status, expanded. Range, 5 meters. Dual points maintained. Combat value, increased, asterisk. I changed my training progress from 10% to 11%. I sat there for a while, replaying the feeling of that roar. If I could predict the exact moment to use it, the cooldown might not be a hard 120 seconds. It likely depended on my recovery speed. If I recovered faster, the gap would shrink. While I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was Chinkai. Brother Chi, where did you run off to this afternoon? He asked. I went out, I replied. Had things to do. Nothing major, he said. Just calling to remind you we have a test first thing tomorrow morning. Did you forget? I actually had. I forgot. Make sure you come back tonight. Don't stay out cultivating until midnight. We have higher math tomorrow. I'm counting on your logic power to carry me. I stayed silent for a second. I told you last time, that's not logic power. I just broke the seal on the textbook. Fine, fine. The seal is broken, he laughed. As long as you ace it. You coming back? I'm coming back. I took a photo of the broken cup on the desk and named it the first sight of the soul-shattering roar. I packed my things and headed out. My rift guide had upgraded. I could now hit more targets from a safer distance and pull off combo attacks. I could feel myself getting stronger. October 18th, Friday night, 11 p.m. I stood on the balcony of my rental, wearing a black hoodie with my notebook tucked in my pocket. My phone was on silent. The wind blew from the south. I closed my eyes and felt it. For the last 3 nights, I had gone out at 11 p.m. to patrol the perimeter of the Tsue housing estate for about an hour. Tonight was the 4th night. I hadn't given myself a code name for the first 3, but tonight, I decided to make it official. I typed a line into my phone's memo, Night Watch, Tsue Estate and surrounding areas. Patrol time, 2300 hours to midnight. I tucked the phone away. The streetlights cast long, flickering shadows on the main road. I moved through the narrow gaps between buildings, my spirit vision fully active. Recently, my range had expanded from 50 meters to about 80. I could now sense the rough outlines of spiritual energy within that radius. Tonight was quiet. I walked for 20 minutes, circling the outer edge of the estate. I didn't find any of that grayish-black spiritual fluctuation I'd seen the night before. Eventually, I turned into an alley outside the north gate. It was narrow, and 2 of the streetlights were dead. The only light came from a distant convenience store. As I stepped inside, my spirit vision caught a signal. A dark purple speck of light flickered at the end of the alley. It was faint, much weaker than the dream demon I'd faced before. I paused, then lowered my stance and hugged the left wall, moving quickly. The signal grew clearer. This cluster of energy was only about 1/3 the size of a dream demon. It was huddled in the shadow of a trash can, appearing as a dull gray-purple mist. It wasn't moving. It looked like it was resting. I watched it for 10 seconds. It wasn't feeding or acting aggressive. I took a step forward. The gray-purple mass sensed me and jumped, but its movements were sluggish, like it had just been startled awake. I stopped 5 meters away and scanned its structure. The outer layer was loose, like soggy paper fiber. It didn't have the scale-like layers of a dream demon. The inner core was blurry and shifted whenever the mass moved. No focus point. No illusion abilities. No signs of being a high-level threat. Wildling, I concluded. I raised my hand and pushed. A sharp blade of wind sliced through the center of the loose structure. It cut through like a knife through tofu. The gray-purple energy splattered, turning into a dozen thin threads that drifted into the air. In less than half a second, they vanished. Nothing was left on the ground. No core. I knelt down and inspected the spot where the thing had disappeared. A small, damp patch stained the ground. It was the only physical evidence that the creature had ever existed. I reached down and touched it. It was cold. I stood up and pulled out my notebook. I flipped to a fresh page and started writing. October 18th alley outside Northgate. Low-level spirit mist. No core. No artificial markings. Sluggish reaction, loose structure. Significantly different from the dream demon, asterisk. I paused after writing that last line. I went back and underlined no artificial markings, then added a side note. The dream demon I fought before had specific engravings on it. This one didn't. This thing was dead, but it left me with a realization. Some of these creatures carried marks, and others didn't. The marked ones were likely planted by someone. The unmarked ones were natural occurrences. They didn't come from the same source. I reread my conclusion to make sure the logic held up. It did. I snapped the notebook shut. Just as I turned to leave, something flashed behind the trash can. A grayish-black shadow lunged from the gap between the bin and the wall. It moved fast, aiming straight for my ankle. I instinctively jumped back, my left hand pushing out a blast of wind. The gust caught the shadow mid-air, knocking it off course. The thing hit the ground and let out a sharp meow. It crouched 3 meters away, tilting its head at me. It was just a black cat. Its eyes reflected the white glow of the distant convenience store. I stood frozen, my right hand still raised in a combat stance, ready to channel more wind. The cat stared at me. I stared at the cat. Slowly, I lowered my hand. I felt the tension in my calves begin to fade. It wasn't an anomaly. It was just a regular cat. The cat licked its paw, gave me one last look, and sauntered away. Its tail flicked back and forth until it vanished into the darkness of the alley. I stood there for a few seconds before finally unclenching my fists. I opened my notebook and added one more line. Asterisk need to distinguish between spiritual signals and physical disturbances from ordinary animals. They can overlap at close range. Asterisk. I walked out of the alley. The night wind felt colder now, biting at my neck. I adjusted my pace and headed back to my rented room. Once inside, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook to my anomaly index. The page was still mostly blank, just a title and a date. I uncapped my pen and began the first formal entry. Name, Dream Demon, tentative. Type, low-level anomaly, marked. First encounter, October 12th, CHUUNI Apartments. Characteristics, gray-black fragmented structure, spirit devouring, shadow shifting. Weakness, 0.3 second reconstruction gap during shifting. Core is vulnerable. Core, dark purple, contains artificial engravings. Note, suspected to be planted. I skipped a line and started the second entry. Name, unnamed, suspected spirit fragment. Type, low-level anomaly, unmarked. First encounter, October 18th, Northgate Alley. Characteristics, gray-purple loose structure, basketball-sized, non-aggressive, slow reactions. Weakness, no defensive structure, easily pierced. Core, none. Note, naturally occurring. Need more samples. I held the notebook up to the light. The two records sat side by side, and the difference was glaring. The Dream Demon had a core, engravings, and combat abilities. The thing in the alley didn't even have a core. It was like a scrap of leftover spiritual energy that couldn't be digested. I drew a horizontal line between the two entries. Above the line, I wrote marked. Below it, I wrote wild. I put a question mark next to the word marked. Who was marking them? Why? The Dream Demon appearing at CHUUNI Apartments wasn't an accident. Someone had delivered it there before October 12th. As I closed the notebook, a system window flickered into view. It looked like a Taobao review page right in the center of my vision. The header read, My Orders, Dream Demon, Low-Level Shadow Swallower. I scrolled through the details. Store, Shadow Invaders. Status, completed. Seller description, a calamity and a threat. Actual product, low-level spirit, fears light. Shadow shifting is interesting but has a low ceiling. Logistics, delivered on time. Arrived exactly when the power went out at CHUUNI Apartments. There was a buyer review from an anonymous user, me. Review. Combat experience was average. The shifting mechanism is creative, but the 0.3 second gap is too obvious. Could be optimized. The core quality is okay, but shows signs of artificial marking. Suspected refurbished second-hand unit. Hope the seller describes the item grade accurately next time. A small line of gray text sat at the bottom. This review will affect the settlement of future similar missions. The host is encouraged to maintain the habit of recording. I twitched my lips and swiped the window away. The power wouldn't be going out at CHUUNI Apartments again this week, but I had to keep patrolling. Where were the unmarked ones coming from? Was the rising concentration of spiritual energy causing them to form naturally? I pushed the questions to the back of my mind and turned off the desk lamp. In the dark, the notebook stayed open. The two entries sat there like the beginning of a secret file. Tuesday, October 22nd, 9 p.m. I spread the notebook out on my desk. I had 4 different colored pens and a ruler ready. It took me 20 minutes to map out every anomaly I had recorded over the past month. I marked the first spot, the woods behind the school where the system first arrived. September 10th. Second spot, the playground flagpole where I got the cleansing breath. September 17th. Third spot, the old library archives. Book of Higher Logic. September 20th. Fourth spot, the cafeteria kitchen. The gray mist spirit the system misidentified as a calamity. September 24th. Fifth spot, the old office building basement. The dark gold spiritual aura I detected during the club activity. Sixth spot, CHUUNI Apartments. October 12th to 14th. Seventh spot, Northgate Alley. The wild spirit without a core. October 18th. I stepped back and squinted at the layout. 7 points. No, that wasn't right. The flagpole and the woods were system-related rewards, not random anomalies. I crossed them out. I circled the remaining 5 points with a pencil and used the ruler to measure the distance between them. The cafeteria was 400 meters southeast of the old office building. The library was 200 meters northwest of the cafeteria. CHUUNI Apartments was about 2 kilometers southeast of the campus. The North Gate alley sat right between the apartments and the school. I stared at the distribution. A shape was starting to form in my mind. I drew a rough oval around the 5 points. The old office building sat almost exactly in the center, just slightly to the north. I stared at the map. The old office building sat almost exactly in the center of the oval, just slightly to the north. If I connected all the points of anomaly I had recorded, the office building was the undeniable heart of it all. I picked up my pen and drew a bold, thick question mark right in the center of the diagram. My mind raced. Was something radiating outward from here? I hesitated for a moment, then drew another small circle over the old teaching building and marked it with a second question mark. CHUUNI Apartments, the old office building, and the old teaching building. These 3 points sat in a perfect straight line. I set the paper down and took a photo with my phone, saving it to my private album. Then, I drew an arrow starting from CHUUNI Apartments, passing through the office building, and pointing straight toward the teaching building. Was the spiritual energy flowing from south to north? The concentration at CHUUNI Apartments was abnormally high. The office building seemed to be a collection point where energy stagnated. That made the old teaching building the end of the line. The theory was incomplete, and I needed more data to prove it, but the framework was there. I scribbled some notes at the bottom of the distribution map. I put the pen down and studied my work. I needed 2 things next. First, I had to confirm what was happening beneath the old teaching building. Second, I needed to figure out how the spiritual concentration shifted during those 3 days of power outages at CHUUNI Apartments. I took a mental inventory of my resources. My spiritual perception reached 80 meters. My wind-type guidance worked within 5 meters. My soul-shaking roar had a range of 3 to 5 meters. I also had a trace amount of shadow resistance and a 3% physical enhancement. It was a start. As I prepared to close my notebook, the system window flickered to life. The format was different this time. A precognition notice. It had 2 sections, a text description at the top and a progress bar at the bottom. Precognition mission, Shadow Adaptability Training, Phase 1. Content, close-range contact with a shadow attribute spiritual source. Requirement, cumulative contact time of 30 minutes or more. Target, automatically locked. Host possesses Time Dream 11. Daily contact of 5 minutes will satisfy the condition. Progress, automatically accumulating. Reward, trace shadow resistance, already issued. I blinked at the words, already issued. I kept reading. Deadline, 30 days. Current progress, completed. No further action required. Penalty for failure, temporary 10% reduction in spiritual perception range for 7 days. Additional penalty, permanent 5% reduction in maximum perception range after recovery. I stared at that word, permanent, for a long time. If I hadn't completed this, I would have lost 5% of my range forever. The system didn't offer an explanation. The progress bar at the bottom flashed, shifting from predicting to completed. Then, the entire notification shrank into a single line of text and vanished. I watched it go, then turned to my mission log and added a new entry. October 22nd. Precognition mission, Shadow Adaptability Training. Completed. I added a note in parentheses. System can issue rewards in advance and then require the mission to be finished. Failure carries permanent penalties. Just as I set the pen down, the window lit up again. It wasn't a mission this time. It was a statement. A neat, pale blue spreadsheet appeared with a header, Lamp Spirit System's Spiritual Power Account Statement. I scrolled through the entries. It was divided into income, expenses, and balance. Current income, Time Dream 11 absorption, plus 12%. Current expenses, Wind Guidance X12, minus 18%. Soul Shaking Roar X2, minus 10%. Daily Spiritual Maintenance, minus 15%. Balance, 67%. Account status, healthy. System suggestion, increase protein intake to improve spiritual recovery efficiency. Recommended daily intake, 1.3x current level. I stared at that last line for 3 seconds. Then, I looked down at my meal plan. 4 meat dishes, 2 vegetables, and soup. I nodded to myself. So, Ordering extra meat wasn't just me being greedy, it was science. I flipped to my daily energy supply page and updated the plan. I added a small remark. Protein is the key to spiritual recovery. System confirmed. I reviewed the statement one more time. My eyes lingered on daily maintenance, minus 15%. Even when I wasn't actively using my spiritual pressure, the low-power standby mode was slowly draining my mana, much like a phone screen staying on while idle. I hadn't noticed that before. I made a mental note to shut it down entirely when I didn't need it to save energy. I recorded the statement data and looked at my map again. I rehearsed the plan in my head. Continue the night patrols, gather more data points, check the teaching building's basement, and get back to Tsue apartments before the end of October to study that box. The system said 5 minutes of contact a day was enough for shadow resistance. I'd start a regular schedule tomorrow. The next day, I was sitting on the second floor of the cafeteria eating lunch when my phone buzzed repeatedly. The freshman group chat was exploding. I swiped it open and saw a forwarded post. The post was from an anonymous ID earlier that morning. The main body was just one sentence. I saw him in Northgate Alley in the middle of the night. I thought he was a creep, but then I saw him chasing a cat. I followed for a bit and realized he was actually chasing a cloud of black stuff in front of the cat. Once the black stuff vanished, he just left. Does anyone know this guy? There were already dozens of replies. Floor 3. Is that the guy who ran the 12.4-second sprint at the sports meet? I saw him spinning around under the flagpole once. Floor 7. I know the spinning guy. The girls in my class say he's just a massive dork with main character syndrome. Floor 12. He's not a dork. He helped me find my bike. In the middle of the night, he just looked at a photo of my bike on my phone and told me to follow him. We walked 300 meters and actually found it. Someone had already half-picked the lock. He touched the bike and told me exactly which way the thief ran. When the police checked the cameras, he was right. Floor 14, I can vouch for him. My phone got stolen in the cafeteria. He walked past, tapped the guy on the shoulder, and said, "Give it back." The thief actually got scared and dropped the phone. I read through the replies one by one, my face expressionless. I picked up a piece of braised pork with my chopsticks and chewed slowly. Then, I picked the phone back up. The comments were getting ridiculous. My friend said when he runs, his feet don't even touch the ground. He can fly. My classmate said when he stands under the flagpole, his eyes literally glow. Someone told me he wears a cape. A black one. I glanced at my phone one last time. The thread was still blowing up. Someone commented that no matter who I was, they thought I looked pretty cool. I stayed silent, flipped my notebook back to the ability status page, and scribbled a note next to my wind elemental guidance entry. I wrote, movement speed buff is now visible to bystanders. Must improve concealment. As I closed the notebook, a system window flickered to life. This time, it wasn't the usual black and white text. A pale gray task sheet popped up. The header read Aesthetics Mission, and in smaller script next to it, evaluation based on artistic merit. Combat efficiency is secondary. The mission was titled Bicycle Recovery Incident. It was a retrospective grade for helping that student find his stolen bike. The system was actually scoring my performance. It broke it down into categories. For movement fluidity, I got a 72%. The system noted my crouch and turn was a bit sluggish, though my exit was excellent. Dialogue matching earned an 85% because my words were minimalist and powerful, fitting the persona of a guardian in the night. Then there was outfit integrity. I got a pathetic 58%. The reason? My black down jacket lacked the visual extension of a cloak. My total score was 68%. The system even provided a suggested dialogue library for future missions. It recommended phrases like shadows, disperse for banishing spirits, or in the name of the wind for elemental displays. There was even a "this place is forbidden" option for intimidation. A small disclaimer at the bottom noted that the system didn't guarantee the effectiveness of these lines. If I wanted to write my own, I just had to make sure they fit the vibe. I stared at that 58% score for my outfit. I looked down at the black hoodie I'd been wearing for 3 days straight. I scrolled back through my older system logs and found a grayed out note I'd missed. Deduction for wearing the same black hoodie 3 days in a row. I put my phone down, then immediately picked it up again. I searched black cloak on Taobao. After browsing a couple of pages, I closed the app. Singles Day sales hadn't started yet. There was no rush. Just as I was about to lock my screen, the window jumped again. This time, the format was completely different. It looked like a social media feed with a pale gray background and a circular profile picture that just said System. Below it, a line read, "From the Genie System." It looked like a personal status update. It said, *Day 37 of system activation. The host's daily aesthetic score is 61, down 4 points from last week. Primary reason, wearing the same black hoodie for 3 days. The system is not interfering with the host's freedom of dress. The system is merely stating facts. At the bottom, it showed that 17 people liked the post and 3 people found it outrageous. I stared at those 17 likes. I tried to click them, but there was no comment function. Who were these people? Who was even seeing this? The system didn't answer. The post lingered in my vision for 10 seconds and then faded away, exactly like a disappearing story on a social feed. I picked up my chopsticks. My bowl of braised beef and potatoes was half cold. I chewed slowly, my mind racing. The aesthetic rating and the social feed were different things, but they sent the same message. The system cared about my image. It didn't just want me to be strong, it wanted me to stay in character. After lunch, I didn't go straight back to the dorm. I took a detour through campus, heading toward the spot where I'd found that bike. Back then, I had used spirit vision from 300 meters away to catch the lingering traces of the owner's energy. Everyone leaves a faint spiritual footprint, as unique as a fingerprint. I had tracked that trace to an alleyway in about 7 minutes. I stood there, retracing my steps in my head. I pulled out my notebook and added a line under the ability section, *tracking application. Spirit vision can capture residual traces to track objects or people. Effective for up to 24 hours depending on environmental interference, *. Once I finished writing, I headed back to the dorm, climbed into bed, and killed the lights. In the darkness, my spirit vision spread out automatically. A pale green web of energy flowed across the ceiling. Over the last few days, the capacity of my vision had expanded. It felt like a riverbed that had been dredged. The flow was getting stronger. The forum called me the Flagpole Hero. I didn't think the name fit. The flagpole was just the first place I'd truly connected with this world. I wasn't a hero. I was a watcher in the night. Still, if the name made people remember me for actually doing things rather than just being a weirdo, I could live with it. A few days later, I was at my desk doing homework. My advanced math results had come back. I got an 84, which was decent. My roommate, CHUUNI, had barely scraped by with a 61. He'd spent half the night howling in the dorm, swearing that he was going to study the power of logic with me starting tomorrow. I told him it wasn't a power, it was just doing practice problems. He didn't care as long as his grades went up. I had just finished an integration problem when I felt it. A ripple. It was like someone had tapped the surface of a still pond right next to me. My spirit vision snapped open. Toward the southeast corner of the campus, a massive surge of spiritual energy was rising. It felt like something was pushing up from deep underground. The color was different this time, a thick, heavy ochre yellow. It wasn't like the gray-black energy I'd seen before. This felt solid, honest, and ancient. I dropped my pen and sat bolt upright. The intensity of this energy was far beyond anything I had encountered yet. This new energy was on a completely different level. Compared to the spirits in the cafeteria, the dream demons, or the thing I'd faced outside the north gate, this was massive. The density and volume were orders of magnitude higher. My first instinct screamed one word, powerful. Something big was coming up. I stood up immediately and grabbed my black hoodie, pulling it on in one motion. I shoved my notebook into my pocket and walked fast, leaving the dorm behind. The energy was coming from the southeast corner of the campus, which was currently a construction site. A notice was taped to the temporary fence, internal road repairs. Estimated completion, November 20th. There was a movable gate in the fence. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The ground was torn apart, revealing large patches of raw earth and 2 excavators sitting silent in the dark. A pit about 5 meters deep had been dug into the center of the site. At the bottom, I could see the remains of some old concrete structures surrounded by piles of rebar and sandbags. I stood at the edge of the pit and pushed my spirit vision to maximum power. That thick, ochre-yellow energy was surging up from the very center of the hole. It looked like a spring, the water pressure steady and the flow constant. But as I watched, I realized there was no consciousness behind it. The energy was simply seeping from deep underground to the surface. The construction work had disturbed the topsoil, creating a channel for it to leak out. "It's not alive," I whispered. I looked down into the pit. The wind blew past, messing up my hair and tugging at my hoodie. I was still clutching my notebook, ready for a fight. But there was no powerful enemy. No seal had been broken. Nothing was crawling out of the abyss. It was just a subterranean spiritual vein that had been accidentally unearthed. I stood there for 30 seconds, looking like a fool in the wind. Then, the system window lit up. The text that popped up made my face freeze. Detected, movement in the earth vein. Suspected, ancient seal loosening. Host is requested to immediately confirm the nature of the target and prepare for engagement. I looked at the text. Then I looked back at the pit, where the yellow energy was quietly oozing out like a leaky pipe. I looked back at the system window. Earth vein, I muttered. Ancient seal. This was just a hole in the ground. The powerful enemy the system warned me about was literally just a construction site. I stood at the gate for another 2 seconds, the wind whipping my collar against my face, and then I turned around. I started walking back to the dorm. Halfway there, the system window flickered again. The format had changed. It was a gray background with a black border and a header that read, Spiritual System Civil Adjudication Tribunal Judgment. I stopped by the side of the road to read the whole thing. Asterisk case number, CS202-41103007. Party, Lin Yuan, host. Subject, improper use of cognitive framework. Findings, between 1607 and 1611 on November 3, 2024, the host misidentified a natural release of spiritual energy at the southeast construction site as the arrival of a powerful enemy. The host performed combat preparations based on this misjudgment, including but not limited to changing into a hoodie, carrying a notebook, and traveling to the target location. Asterisk verification. The spiritual fluctuation was caused by construction disturbing a subterranean vein. It is a passive release. No conscious entity exists. No aggressive intent. The facts do not match the host's assessment. Asterisk ruling. This behavior constitutes a minor-level overinterpretation violation. Penalty, narrative tension index deduction, suspended. Probation period, 7 days. If no similar violations occur, the deduction is canceled. If repeated, the penalty applies immediately. Mandatory requirement. Complete the Foundational Methodology for Verification of Perceived Information online course. A post-course reflection of no less than 5,000 words is required. Asterisk writes, the party has the right to appeal within 24 hours. To appeal, say I appeal to the system. Success rate, approximately 3%. Asterisk note, this judgment has been recorded in the host's file. It does not affect regular mission settlements. We hope the host learns from this mistake. Asterisk. By the time I reached the last line, my lip was twitching. I stood in silence for 2 seconds. Appeal, I muttered. I want to appeal. The system didn't react for a moment. Then, small text appeared. Asterisk appeal received. Processing. Appeal rejected. Original judgment stands. Asterisk. I watched the rejection message fade from my vision. I took a deep breath, thought about the judgment one more time, and headed back to my room. When I pushed the door open, Chun Kai was in the middle of a game. He glanced back at me. Where'd you run off to? He asked. Is there another situation? I misjudged it, I said shortly. Misjudged what? Was it an alien invasion? I didn't answer right away. I opened my notebook to the anomaly log. On the latest entry, I wrote, November 3rd, construction disturbed a subterranean vein. Passive release. Misidentified as a powerful enemy. Confirmed, non-combat event. Then, I flipped to a brand new page. At the top, I wrote a new title, Misjudgment Log. I left a space and started writing. When I finished, I tapped the desk with my pen cap. Perception is real, but interpretation isn't always right. I drew a line under that sentence and closed the book. What's wrong with you today? Chun Kai asked, taking a break from his game. You've been writing ever since you got back. I sat at my desk, my back to him. I learned a lesson today. What lesson? What you see isn't always the truth, I said. But it is definitely what you saw. The difference lies in how you choose to understand it. Chun-Kai went silent for a few seconds. Did you have another realization? It was a mistake, I said. But it wasn't a blind one. I'll be more accurate next time. I pulled the curtains shut, sat back down, and started typing the 5,000-word reflection the system demanded. The title was 3 Insights Regarding the Verification of Perceived Information. Chun-Kai caught a glimpse of my screen, saw the title, and immediately looked away without saying a word. The next day, I was in my ancient literature class. I sat in the 3rd row from the back, right by the window. My notebook was open, and I was absent-mindedly spinning my pen. I doodled a crooked cat in the margin of the 3rd page. Up front, the professor was lecturing about the 8 great masters of Tang and Song. His voice was steady and loud. I was trying to pay attention, but I couldn't help noticing the girl in white. She was the one I'd seen in the stands during the sports meet. Today, she was sitting just 2 rows ahead of me, diagonally to my left. Her seat wasn't the problem. The problem was when she arrived. She had walked through the back door exactly 30 seconds before the bell rang. She'd scanned the room and picked that specific spot. 30 seconds before that was the exact moment I had turned my head to look at the door. The timing was too perfect. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But over the next 10 minutes, I watched her. 3 minutes ago, she tilted her head slightly in my direction. 5 minutes before that, she reached up to adjust her hair. From my angle, it looked like she was checking something. It's normal for her to be interested in me, I thought. After all, not everyone can perceive spiritual energy. Before I could finish that thought, the bell rang. The professor packed his notes and left, and the classroom filled with the sound of students chatting. As I looked down to pack my notebook, I saw a flash of white in my peripheral vision. She was moving. She was walking straight toward me. Adjust your mindset, I told myself. Don't let her know I can see the energy. Stay natural. Don't be too stiff, but don't be too friendly either. The goal is to keep her guessing while I figure her out. Suwon stopped right by my desk. She wore a white jacket and dark trousers. She was holding a book in her hand. It was an ancient literature textbook, the same one required for our class, but hers looked brand new. The corners weren't curled, and the pages were crisp. Lin Yuan, Suwon said. Her voice was calm, devoid of any unnecessary emotion. It was less of a greeting and more of a confirmation of my identity. I looked up, meeting her eyes. We know each other? I know you, she replied. Second place in the 100-meter dash at the sports meet. The guy who gave that speech at the opening ceremony about guarding the boundaries of the world. You're a bit of a celebrity on campus. I leaned back slightly. So, is there something you need? Nothing in particular. She shifted the textbook to her other hand and looked at me steadily. I just wanted to ask, where do you usually go after class? The question sounded natural, like she was just curious about my routine. But I knew better. This was the first step of intelligence gathering. She was trying to map out my life. My strategy was simple, give her a vague answer. I couldn't let her lock down my location. It depends, I said. Sometimes the library, sometimes back to the dorms. Every now and then, I sit in the back hills for a while. The back hills? Yeah, the little woods back there. I watched her face closely. It's nice, quiet, good for thinking. This was my own little test. If she took the bait, it meant she was interested in my territory. If she declined, we'd just stay casual classmates. Suwon looked at me for 2 seconds. Maybe I'll check it out sometime. I have another class now, so I'll be going. See you next time. She turned and walked away. I watched her back as she exited through the rear door, her white jacket flashing against the doorframe before vanishing. It was only then that I realized I was gripping my notebook tightly. See you next time, I muttered. It looked like she was planning on making this a regular thing. I looked down at the spot where she'd been standing and tried to sense the air. There wasn't much left, but I confirmed one thing. She had spiritual energy. It was faint, but it was definitely there. Later at the cafeteria, I grabbed a tray with 4 meats, 2 vegetables, and a bowl of soup. I found a spot against the wall and sat down across from Chun-Kai, who was currently inhaling a bowl of rice. Hey, I said, poking at my food. Do you know a girl from the literature department who always wears a white jacket? Freshman, long hair, pretty. Chun-Kai looked up, his mouth full. Which one? There are tons of girls in white jackets. But if you mean the really good-looking one, that's probably Soo-won. She's in the class next to ours. Why? You finally growing a pair? No, I said. I just think she's a little strange. How so? I hesitated. She came up and talked to me today. Shin-kai swallowed hard. Okay, that is strange. Soo-won is famous for being an ice beauty. She usually keeps to herself. What did she want? She asked where I go after class. I put my chopsticks down. What do you think that means? Shin-kai went silent, looking thoughtful. Two options. Either she's into you and wants to ask you out, or she was sent by someone else to scout you. I blinked. You're actually taking this seriously? I learned from the best, idol. He grinned, pointing at me. Your crazy notebook is full of analysis, right? The first time I saw it, I thought you were sick. But after seeing it so much, I think you're onto something. Though, if I'm being honest, people like you, thinkers, have one big problem. You make simple things way too complicated. I spent the afternoon in the dorm. After 30 minutes of trying to do homework, I gave up and pulled out my anomaly observation log. The page for today was blank. I took my pen and wrote a title, Soo-won. I started listing the details. Name, Soo-won. Department, literature. Features, white jacket, dark trousers, long hair. Contact point, ancient literature classroom. Method, initiated conversation. I drew a line across the middle and wrote my preliminary judgment. First, she's interested in me. Could be personal, could be something else. Second, she has trace amounts of spiritual energy. She isn't a normal person. I added a question at the bottom. Who is she? A curious civilian? Someone with special abilities? Or part of an organization? I circled the last one. 3 kilometers away, Soo-won was sitting in a quiet milk tea shop. She had a notebook open too, but hers was a gray loose-leaf binder. Everything was organized by date and subject. She flipped to a fresh page. Target, Lin Yuan. Date, November 6th. Method, initiated contact. Result, established baseline. Target has counter-surveillance awareness, though it's unrefined. She added 2 more lines. Suspected spiritual perception. Source unknown, likely not hereditary. Subject appears non-hostile but uncontrollable. Recommendation, continued observation. She closed the binder and took a sip of her tea. Back in my dorm, I flipped the page of my notebook to start my math homework, but I couldn't get Soo-won out of my head. The next day, I arrived at my literature theory class. The room smelled like leftover breakfast. People were napping in the front rows or scrolling through their phones in the back. I chose a seat in the very last row against the wall. It gave me a view of the whole room and ensured no one could watch me from behind. Soo-won showed up, but she wasn't wearing white today. She had on a light gray jacket. She sat in the middle section near the aisle, sitting perfectly straight, her back not even touching the chair. She was writing rapidly in a notebook. I took a breath and activated my spiritual vision. I didn't push it too hard. I didn't want her to notice. In my vision, a thin layer of light appeared around her. It was stable, a pale silver-gray color, flowing slowly around her body. I'd observed enough people to know the patterns. Normal people have fragmented, flickering energy. Soo-won's was continuous. It moved in a clear circuit, from her shoulders to her arms and back to her torso. It was a closed loop. I pushed a bit more energy into my vision to see deeper. Her energy texture was different from mine. Mine felt like loose steam, thin and jagged at the edges. Hers was like a concentrated sphere of water, dense, tight, and heavy. I pulled back and quickly wrote in my notes, Soo-won. Confirmed spiritual fluctuations. Structure is denser than mine. Flow is stable, Just as I finished the sentence, Soo-won's shoulder twitched. She didn't turn around. She felt me. She didn't look back, she didn't stop her pen, but she knew I was watching. Was she pretending not to notice? Or did she just not care? I added a final note. Likely detected my probe. Ignored it, The bell rang, signaling the end of class. I barely had time to close my notebook before that gray jacket appeared right next to my desk. She was even faster than yesterday. Soo-won stood right beside me, her textbook clutched in her hand. She looked down at me and spoke. Her voice was calm, but her words hit like a hammer. She told me I was near the old teaching building last night. My hand froze as I was packing my bag. I had gone there around 10:30. I'd slipped out through the middle gate, followed the perimeter wall to the north side of that old building, and stood there for 10 minutes. I had used my spiritual vision to scan the area's energy distribution. I didn't go inside. I didn't even get close to the main entrance. I just circled the fence and left. I didn't think anyone had seen me. Just passing by, I said, trying to sound casual. Suwon stared at me. She didn't press for more details. Her eyes didn't flicker with emotion. She just seemed to be weighing the reliability of my words. "Don't go there again," she said. I leaned back against my chair, letting that sentence echo in my mind. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. What was her angle? Did she know what was inside, or was she just repeating rumors? "How do you know that place isn't safe?" I asked. Suwon hesitated for a heartbeat. "Someone told me." Then she turned and walked away. Her gray jacket vanished through the back door of the classroom in an instant. I sat there unmoving. My fingers drummed twice against the cover of my notebook. Someone told her. That meant she knew people who understood the truth about the old teaching building. But did she know the details herself? I flipped open my notebook to the page I'd started for her. Under her name, I wrote a new line. Asterisk, she is warning me. Why? Asterisk. I closed the book, threw my bag over my shoulder, and walked out. My mind was racing. I needed to figure out exactly how much she knew. I stopped at the top of the stairs and checked my phone calendar. 3 more days of classes this week. I decided I'd head back to the perimeter of the old building over the weekend. I needed to scan the spiritual energy again and compare it to my first reading. I walked down the stairs, replaying the day's events. Taking action when there's an information gap is risky. I'd gather more intel for a few days and wait for the weekend. At the cafeteria entrance, I pulled out my phone and messaged Chun-Kai. I asked him if he knew Suwon's friends or who she usually hung out with. Chun-Kai replied a moment later. No idea. She's a lone wolf. Leaves as soon as class ends. Never seen her eat with anyone. What? I pushed open the cafeteria door. If Suwon really knew what was in that building, she wasn't just someone with a bit of spiritual energy. She was something more. Someone told her, but she might have sensed it herself, too. I needed to confirm her identity. I sat down and started eating. I took a big bite of food before I realized I was using a spoon instead of chopsticks. Later that night, I sat at my desk with my black notebook spread open. I spent over an hour reading it from start to finish. I went through everything. The world-building notes, the spiritual training logs, pages and pages of tiny, neat handwriting. My finger stopped on page 7. Asterisk July 12th light rain. Small woods behind the mountain. Asterisk. I'd recorded a week's spiritual fluctuation in the southeast, suspecting a branch of an underground spirit vein. I remembered that night. I'd crouched under a camphor tree for 40 minutes until my legs went numb. I hadn't actually sensed a thing. I only wrote that I did because I felt frustrated coming home empty-handed. I flipped to page 9. Asterisk July 20th. Sunny. Library 2nd floor. I'd recorded high spiritual density there, calling it a possible entrance to a temple of knowledge. I wrote that while studying for exams. I was tired, and a breeze blew in from the south window. Since my spirit vein theory from the week before had gone nowhere, I'd just made up a new one to keep the log going. The further I flipped, the more I saw it. Every entry looked professional on its own, but together, they were a mess. There was no connection, no system. It was all guesswork. I closed the notebook and stared at the cover. Then, I flipped back to the very first page. I took a red pen and wrote a new heading in bold letters, corrections. I wrote slowly this time. I weighed every word before letting the ink hit the paper. Conclusion: most previous records are hypotheses based on speculation, not observed facts. Future records must distinguish between the two. I turned to my abilities page. Most of that was actually accurate. My spiritual sense had a range of 80 meters. My wind manipulation reached 5 meters. Those were tested. I leaned back and reviewed my edits. The mountain entry was crossed out. The library entry was modified. The cafeteria and the residential complex entries were confirmed. Finally, I had a baseline. I knew what was real and what was a guess. As I was about to close the book, a small line of gray text popped up from the system. Detection. Host cognitive mode has been adjusted. Analytical capacity increased by 0.3%. Current progress, 0.3%. I stared at that 0.3% for 2 seconds. I finished reading the notification, then turned to the very last blank page of my notebook. I wrote one sentence: "The world is bigger than I thought, and it's still growing." I stared at those words for a long time. Then, I skipped 2 lines and wrote a new title: Soo-won's possible identity. I started listing possibilities. 1. Member of a special organization. Evidence: she knows about the old building. She is backing. Her interest in me isn't personal, it's purposeful. Her information level exceeds a normal student's. Doubt: she's young and doesn't socialize, which doesn't fit the profile of a deep cover agent. I thought for a moment and wrote a second possibility: successor of a hidden family. Evidence: high-level spiritual energy and signs of formal training. Doubt: not enough evidence to confirm the source of her energy. I paused, twirling my pen. Then, I wrote a third possibility: vampire. The pen stopped. I stared at the word for 2 seconds, and my lip twitched. I was about to write down a fourth, more serious possibility for Soo-won's identity. I hesitated. After a moment, I decided to let it go. I closed my notebook. Usually, whenever I recorded something important, the system would react. The window would glow, or I'd get a notification about a 1% increase in training progress or some other useless log entry. This time, there was nothing. I glanced at the interface in the depths of my mind. The pale blue frame that usually floated there was gone. There was no response. I waited for 10 seconds and tried again. "Are you there?" Still nothing. A strange sensation washed over me. It felt like a lamp that was always on had suddenly been switched off. I hadn't paid much attention to the light before, but now that it was dark, the room felt emptier. I stood up, stretched my shoulders, and sat back down. I flipped the notebook open, stared at the pages, and closed it again. I repeated this for 15 minutes. Finally, the pale blue frame flickered back into existence. The light was softer than usual. A message popped up. System maintenance complete. Maintenance logs edited. Impact during maintenance: none. Thank you for your patience, host. I sat in my chair and stared at the word edited for a long time. So, the system could go offline too? I asked a question, but the system didn't answer. The announcement lingered in my vision for a moment before slowly fading away. I looked down at my open notebook. The system had crashed right when I was organizing my notes. It went down while I was trying to separate fact from fiction, and when it came back, it told me the logs were edited. It clearly didn't want me knowing the details. I lay down on my bed. The ceiling was a blur in the dark. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the window frame. I listened to that high-pitched drone until I started to drift off. My last thought was simple. If Soo-won really turned out to be a vampire, today's notes would be worth a fortune. My breathing leveled out. The curtains fluttered once in the breeze, then went still. The next evening at 8 o'clock, I walked into the main hall of the library. I knew something was wrong immediately. Usually, the study area was packed at this hour. Tonight, there were only 7 or 8 people scattered around, all huddled near the entrance. The entire floor was so quiet you could hear a page turn from across the room. The librarian sat behind the desk looking pale. She gripped a ring of keys so hard her knuckles were white. I slowed my pace and let my spiritual vision spread out. Within 150 meters, I caught a disturbance. There was a mass of spiritual energy swirling in the basement. I couldn't quite pin down its nature. It wasn't a solid spirit like the Stone Dream Demon, nor was it a steady flow like the spiritual pulse at the construction site. "Someone's down there," I muttered. I started walking toward the basement stairs. The librarian saw me and stood up instantly. "Student, you can't go down there." "Why not?" I asked. "There's something moving," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Since this afternoon, the staff heard a tapping sound. We thought it was the pipes, but when we checked, there was nothing there. But the sound won't stop. It sounds like someone walking around down there." She paused, looking toward the dark stairwell. "It got louder at night." A security guard went down halfway, but he turned around and ran back up. He refused. "Where is he now?" "He left. Said he'd wait until morning." I nodded. "I'll go take a look." The librarian stared at me, stunned. "You're going down?" "I have good ears," I said, already reaching the stairs. "I might be able to tell what it is just by listening. I'm just looking, nothing else." Before she could stop me, I was already heading down. The basement stairs weren't long, 14 steps and a sharp turn. The motion sensor lights were broken. Only a dim, yellow emergency light flickered at the top, casting weak shadows that looked like they were filtered through dirty glass. I reached the bottom. A locked iron door stood in my way. I touched the lock. It was cold. Spiritual energy was seeping through the gaps in the door frame. I took a half step back, wondering if I should force it open, when I heard footsteps behind me. Move. The voice came from the stairs. It was calm, but carried a tone that didn't allow for an argument. I turned around. A figure stood halfway down the stairs. He was backlit, so I couldn't see his face, but his silhouette was sharp and perfectly upright. He was wearing a school uniform, but the way he stood, his back as straight as a spear, made it look like a custom-tailored suit. A thought popped into my head, and before I could stop myself, I blurted it out. This guy has an incredible aura. He's definitely a powerhouse. The man on the stairs went silent for a second. He walked down the remaining steps and stood in front of me. The light from above finally hit his face. He had a square jaw, a high brow, and a thin, expressionless mouth. "I am Qin Feng," he said, introducing himself. "Do you know me?" "I don't," I replied. "Am I in your way?" I stepped to the side, but I didn't retreat. Qin Feng walked to the iron door. He reached out and gripped the padlock. With a sudden burst of strength, he snapped the shackle. The sound of the broken metal hitting the concrete floor echoed loudly in the small space. He pushed the door open and walked in. I followed. The basement was tiny, maybe 10 square meters. The floor was bare concrete, and the corners were piled with old newspapers and metal cabinets. In the center of the room, that mass of spiritual energy was slowly moving in circles, as if someone were pacing in place. Qin Feng stood in the middle of the room with his back to me, staring at the floor. I watched him through the doorway. He moved with steady, heavy steps. Every time his soul hit the ground, it synced perfectly with the rhythm of the spiritual disturbance. It was like he was using his own footsteps to recalibrate the energy. He tapped a specific spot on the floor with the tip of his shoe. The spiritual energy vanished instantly. It was like someone had hit the kill switch on a running machine. The sound and the vibration stopped at the exact same time. The basement fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a ceiling pipe. Qin Feng knelt down and touched the spot he had just tapped. He pulled his hand back, inspected his fingers, then stood up and brushed the dust off his palms. He turned to leave. As he passed me, he spoke a single sentence. "It's fine now. Close the door." I stood by the frame and watched him walk past me and disappear back up the stairs. I noted his style in the back of my mind. He didn't hesitate or observe. He just acted. It was clean, decisive, and efficient. Suddenly, my system window lit up. The format was completely different from anything I had seen before. It looked like an official government report. Item number LQ202-41113003. It was a high-level spiritual energy warning. The detection distance was 4.2 meters. The individual's level was listed as condensation stage, C-class. The threat assessment was non-hostile, and the recommendation was left to my own discretion. The system had even taken a snapshot of his spiritual structure. At the bottom, it was signed by the Action Support Department of the Genie system. The system had identified him the moment he walked past me. I wondered what C-class meant. It was definitely higher than my own level. But the system didn't mark him as an enemy. I wanted to open the spiritual snapshot and study it, but this wasn't the right place. I realized the system had switched to document mode specifically because of Qin Feng. It was like a person putting on a formal suit for a serious occasion. The system recognized him as a formal figure, so it produced a formal report. I walked out of the library. The wind was howling, so I pulled my zipper up to my chin. Qin Feng was already gone. I replayed the keywords in my head. C-class, non-hostile, action support. The conclusion was simple. He was stronger than me. His methods were better than mine. And the system thought he was important enough to change its entire interface. I pulled out my notebook and started a new entry. Qin Feng, male, height, approximately 1.8 meters. Appearance, sharp, poised, like he was born to wear a suit. Location, library basement. Abilities, spiritual perception and the power to suppress anomalies. Assessment, higher level than me. Note, he handles things himself and never explains why. I told myself that the next time I saw him, I had to ask how he did it. When I got back to the dorm, CHUUNI was scrolling through his phone on his bed. He looked up as I walked in. He asked if I had gone to the library because people were hearing strange tapping sounds in the basement. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I told him I went. I told him it wasn't a ghost, just a spiritual disturbance. Did someone fix it? He asked. Not me, I replied. I looked at the name in my notebook. A guy who wears a school uniform but doesn't look like a student. CHUUNI rolled his eyes and turned over. He told me to stop going to those places alone before I got myself killed. I just closed my notebook. If I hadn't gone, I wouldn't have known something was wrong. And I wouldn't have known that someone was already cleaning up the mess before I could even get there. The next day, I stood by the north wall of the library. My hands were in my pockets, and I had my system running on low power. I wasn't training. I was waiting. I knew he would show up again. As long as there were anomalies on campus, he would be there to fix them. I was the hunter waiting for the rabbit. 10 minutes passed. I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't heavy, but the rhythm was incredibly steady. I didn't turn around. The person stopped 3 meters away. What are you looking for? He asked. I turned. Chin-Fong was standing there in a gray jacket and black pants. His posture was still perfectly straight, his face expressionless. I stared at him for 2 seconds. I'm looking for you, I said. Chin-Fong didn't respond. We stood in the shadows of the library wall while the wind whipped the dead grass at our feet. Suddenly, he shifted his weight. I didn't even have time to react. A gray blur flashed before my eyes, and my back slammed against the wall. My head bounced off the bricks with a dull thud. He didn't touch me, but his arm was barred across my chest, locking me in place. I looked at his arm through my spiritual vision. The energy lines were wrapped tight, dense as steel cables. I've been watching you for 2 weeks, Chin-Fong said. He stepped back and released me. The north gate of the Tsuiwei neighborhood, the library basement. You get around. He looked me up and down. He told me my method was always the same. I saw a problem, I rushed in, and I tried to overpower it with brute force. He said I had talent and some combat experience, but my style had no roots. My power came from the environment, not from within myself. I could win when things were easy, but I would crumble in a real fight. I straightened up, my back still aching from the wall. How do you know all this? I asked. I've been handling these things for a long time, he said. The library basement isn't the first one. This school has had anomalies since it was built. Most people just don't know. He paused. My name is Chin-Fong, student council president. I'm the heir to the Chin family. He explained that the Chin family was an ancient martial arts lineage. 7 generations of heritage. He spoke in a flat, calm voice. He told me he had been handling campus anomalies since he was 16. That was 3 years of experience. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, processing it. 7 generations versus my 2 months of fumbling around. The gap between us felt like a physical weight. But then, a spark of excitement hit me. So, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can you fly? Do you have legendary powers? Chin-Fong looked at me like I was crazy. No, he said. That's only in novels. Can you at least shoot light beams or something? I asked, hopeful. No. Chin-Fong replied flatly. Then what do ancient martial arts families actually use? Do you have cool move names? Like Void Slasher or something? Chin-Fong cut me off. Fists and feet. Archery. Footwork. Physical conditioning. Internal energy guidance. That's it. Nothing else. I fell silent for a second. That's surprisingly basic. He didn't respond to that. He leaned against the opposite wall, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, looking at me sideways. You have talent, but your path is wrong. You're like a 10-story building with no foundation. You look tall, but the first gust of wind will knock you down. If you don't want something to happen to you, stop messing around. If you encounter an anomaly, come find me. I'll handle it. Is that an invitation? I asked. It's a warning. Are you going to the old teaching building tonight? Chin-Fong stared at me, silent. I didn't back down. I repeated the question. You've been watching me for 2 weeks. You know I was scouting the perimeter of that building 2 nights ago. I felt something there, something much deeper than what was in the library basement. Since you cleared the basement, have you been to the teaching building? After a long pause, Chin-Fong spoke. I have. What's down there? Things you aren't ready to know yet, he said. Your rank isn't high enough. Then what rank am I? When do I get to fly? The path of martial arts is divided into 5 realms, he explained. Awakening, sensing, condensing, revolving, and breaking. Each major realm is split into early, middle, and late stages. He paused, looking me over. Since you can manifest 2 wind blades, you're basically at the late stage of awakening. If you can perfectly control the shape of the wind, you'll break through the limits of the awakening stage. Qin Feng spent the next few minutes giving me a crash course on the hidden world. He told me about the power players and the unspoken rules, groups like the Special Management Bureau, the Equilibrium Council, and the All Souls Society. He said he didn't want me accidentally offending someone and getting erased. That would be a waste. Once he finished, he turned toward the library's main entrance. He stopped for a moment and looked back. If you insist on investigating dangerous areas, come find me. Don't go in alone. I watched his back disappear around the corner. I stood there, leaning against the cold wall, lost in thought. A descendant of a great lineage. 3 years of experience. A master of the condensing stage. Then there was me, 2 months in, barely at the tail end of awakening, with a wind range of 5 meters. I couldn't even dodge a single step he took. I looked down at my palms, then pulled out my notebook. Under the page for Qin Feng, I added a new line. Asterisk, he will try to stop me, but I'm still going. Next time, I need to figure out how to convince him. Asterisk. I tucked the notebook away, but another thought hit me. Student council president, heir to the Qin family, and the guy cleaning up campus anomalies for 3 years. How many had he handled? And after all his work, were the anomalies on campus increasing or decreasing? I glanced at the library wall. The wind scars were already beginning to fade, healing themselves. I turned and started walking back to the dorms. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Chen Kai. Asterisk, that Qin Feng guy you mentioned? I saw him today. He looks like a freaking supermodel. Asterisk. I didn't reply. I was thinking about something else. Even though Qin Feng refused to teach me, he had let something slip. When he listed his skills, archery, footwork, conditioning, internal energy, he said them in a specific order. The order of training. Archery was first. I pulled out my notebook and wrote, asterisk archery. The first lesson of ancient martial arts, asterisk. Qin Feng had accidentally given me the key. I pocketed my phone and picked up my pace. I had a lot of information to process. Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. The empty space behind the basketball courts on the east side of the sports field was deserted. Weeds grew through the cracks in the concrete, and the north wall was covered in withered creepers. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind was still. Qin Feng and I stood 5 meters apart. He had taken off his jacket, draping it over a pull-up bar. He wore a gray long-sleeved shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. His face was expressionless. I'll suppress my strength, he said. I won't hurt you, but I won't go easy either. If you can take it, take it. If you can't, admit defeat. I unzipped my jacket and rolled my wrists. Fine. Qin Feng didn't give me any more time to prepare. His first step made the ground tremble. My spiritual perception caught the flow of energy instantly. It surged from his soles to his knees, then up through his waist like water through a pipe. His second step was faster. By the third, he had closed half the distance. I lunged to the left, guiding a burst of wind at my ankles to slide myself 2 meters away. Qin Feng's palm brushed past my right shoulder, the air pressure stinging my ear. Fast dodge, he noted, but he didn't stop. He didn't lose momentum. He planted his left foot, spun his body, and threw a right punch straight from his hip toward my chest. It wasn't a flashy move, just a straight punch, but the timing was perfect. I was still caught in the inertia of my dodge. It was too late to change direction. I crossed my arms over my chest and slammed a wall of wind between us. The punch hit the air wall and shattered it. The remaining force slammed into my forearms, knocking me back 2 steps. My shoes screeched against the concrete. Your speed is useful, Qin Feng said, pulling back his fist and standing tall. But your punches have no follow-through. There was no mockery in his voice, just cold observation. Every strike is like a bubble on the water. It looks pretty, but it's empty inside. I've been training for 15 years. Your basics are terrible. I shook out my numb arms. I've only been at this for 2 months. For 2 months, this is decent. It's enough for low-level spirits. But if you face anything complicated, you're dead. He stepped forward again. Again. I won't let you dodge so far this time. He moved even faster. I pushed my spiritual perception to its limit, catching every micro-movement. The drop of his shoulder, the inward turn of his knee, the shift in his center of gravity. Every detail told me exactly what he was going to do. The problem was, even though I saw it, my body couldn't keep up. There was a time gap between the information I received and my physical reaction that I couldn't bridge. I dodged the first strike, but the second one caught me. In my mind's eye, his fist moved in slow motion, every frame precise and readable. But before my body could move, the punch landed on my shoulder blade. The force wasn't heavy, but it was enough to send me stumbling. Qin Feng pulled back. You can see my movements, he said, but your body can't react. I steadied myself, my breathing heavy. You're too fast. It's not about speed, Qin Feng replied. Your eyes are much faster than your body. You see me punching, and only after you see it do you start thinking about how to dodge. That delay is why you lose. By the time you decide what to do, the punch has already landed, Qin Feng said. You have to make your body keep up with your brain. I stayed silent for a few seconds, processing his words. Then, I took 2 steps back to create some distance. I took a deep breath, drawing the power of the soul-shattering roar up from my core. If I couldn't compete with his speed or distance, I had to forcibly break his rhythm. Sound is faster than the wind. I opened my mouth. Spiritual energy surged from my chest, condensing and accelerating in my throat. Then, I let it rip. Crack. The sound wave erupted in a fan shape in front of me. The air itself distorted into a visible ripple, rushing toward Qin Feng. He didn't dodge when the wave hit him. He didn't even flinch. He just tilted his head slightly and moved his right foot back half a step to steady his center of gravity. He tanked the entire blast. His brow furrowed for a split second, like someone who had just been hit by a sudden gust of gritty sand. Then, his expression returned to normal. A sonic attack, Qin Feng said, straightening his head. He looked at me with a spark of genuine interest. You actually have an ability like that? I was still gasping for air. It uses spiritual energy to compress and vibrate the air. Qin Feng nodded slowly. The effect is decent, but it's not enough. If you practice the frequency and penetration, you could use it for crowd control. I stared at him, realizing something demoralizing. He hadn't truly exerted himself once during this entire fight. He had been suppressing his strength the whole time. Qin Feng pulled his sleeves down, grabbed his jacket from the pull-up bar, and slung it over his shoulder. He turned to leave, then paused. If you're going to keep hunting things like the Dream Demon, fix your basics first. Otherwise, when you meet something tougher, you won't even be able to run. He walked away. His footsteps faded into the distance against the concrete. I crouched there for a long time, slowly steadying my breathing. Eventually, I dragged myself to the nearby steps, sat down, and opened my notebook to record my thoughts on the fight. The most urgent task was shortening the circuit between seeing, understanding, and acting. As I prepared to close the book, the system window flickered to life. The message was brief, but more blunt than usual. Combat record summary. Opponent level, condensation stage. Result, defeat. Translation delay, 1.6 seconds. The system noted that there was a transfer loss between my cognitive framework and the raw spiritual information. To fix the delay, I needed to improve my independent perception. I stared at that number, 1.6 seconds, for a long time. I'd seen it before in my daily summaries, but I'd always thought it was just a stat. It wasn't that my reactions were too slow, it was that my understanding was lacking. I was relying on the system to translate the world for me. If I could learn to read the information from my spirit vision without the system's help, I could skip that 1.6 second gap entirely. I circled that sentence, closed the notebook, and headed back to the dorm. If I could get that delay down to 1 second, half a second, or 0, would that be enough time? I didn't know, but I knew I had to try. When I pushed the dorm door open, Chun Kai poked his head out from his bunk. What happened to your shoulder? I was practicing, I said, sitting down at my desk. Practicing? It looks like you got jumped. I opened my notebook. I did get hit, but he didn't use much force. Chun Kai went silent for a moment. You got beat up and you're saying he didn't use much force? I don't get you, man. He retreated behind his bed curtains, but called out one last time. If you really are getting bullied, just say so. I can't fight, but I can call the police for you. I'm fine, I replied. I flipped to a new page and drew a diagram. On the left, I wrote C. On the right, I wrote act. In the middle, I drew an arrow and labeled it 1.6 seconds. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Qin Feng's words kept echoing in my head. Your eyes are much faster than your body. Too fast. That 1.6-second gap was a death sentence. My shoulder was still throbbing where he'd hit me. It felt like I'd been struck by a heavy stone. I picked up my pen and started a deep analysis of the gap between us. Foundation. Qin Feng has 15 years of training. I have 0 systematic training. My abilities are innate talents, not a solid foundation. Experience. 3 months versus 3 years. He's been dealing with anomalies since middle school. I'm a rookie. Level. I'm at the sensing stage. He's at the condensation stage. His spiritual reserves are at least double mine, and his energy structure is far more dense. That's a hard gap I can't bridge with tricks. I looked over the list. Then, at the bottom, I wrote, only advantages. Speed. My wind elemental guidance gives me bursts of speed, but it drains my energy too fast. Perception. I can see energy flow and attack patterns, but the 1.6-second delay ruins it in a real fight. Intuition. High accuracy, but no system to verify it. Prone to misjudgment. I finished writing and stared at my conclusion. The advantage is I can see. The disadvantage is that even though I see it, I can't do anything about it. Priority. Build a foundation. I circled those last 3 words. Immediately, the system window glowed. Mission triggered. Seek an ancient legacy bearer to learn foundational methods. Target. Find a practitioner with a systematic inheritance and learn their basic cultivation. Suggested candidate. Qin Feng. Successor of the Qin family, condensation stage, ancient martial inheritance. Note. Currently, only one person on campus meets these criteria. It is up to the host to decide whether to execute. No penalty for failure, but the longer you wait, the higher the combat risk. I stared at the name Qin Feng and the phrase only one person for a while. My mouth twitched. You're baiting me, aren't you? The system didn't answer. It was just a fancy way of telling me to go beg Qin Feng for help. The system was using middle schooler Chinibyu language to wrap up a reality I didn't want to face. It was telling me to stop being stubborn. I needed him. I'm not asking him for anything, I muttered. I snapped my notebook shut and capped my pen with a sharp click. I walked to the window. Outside, a stray cat was licking its paws under a streetlight, its tail swaying slowly. I watched it for a few seconds, then turned back to my desk and sat down again. I flipped back to the pages about Qin Feng. I reread everything. His level, his behavior, the way he talked, and his evaluation of me. I wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. Is he willing to teach? Then I added a question mark. I flipped back further to something he had said to me before. Asterisk, if you don't want anything to happen, stop messing around. If you encounter an anomaly, come find me. Asterisk. He had already invited me once. I just had to figure out if that offer was still on the table. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and climbed into bed. A sliver of moonlight squeezed through the curtains, landing on my pillow. I'm definitely not begging him, I said to the empty room. Then I closed my eyes. The next day was Sunday. By noon, the cafeteria was packed, and the lines were long. I stood there with my tray, lost in thought, wondering how I was going to handle my next move. I found a seat in the cafeteria and sat down. My mind was still racing, thinking about the mission the system gave me last night. I wasn't going to go looking for Qin Feng. At least, I wasn't going to make a special trip just for him. But I told myself that if I happened to run into him in the cafeteria, and if there happened to be an empty seat next to him, and if he happened to not be busy, well, then it wouldn't be begging. I was busy convincing myself of this logic when a food tray landed on the table right across from me. It was Qin Feng. He sat down with his meal and glanced at me. His voice was flat, stripped of any unnecessary emotion. Made up your mind? He asked. I froze for a second, my chopsticks hovering over my food. I looked up at him. He had already started eating, his expression perfectly calm. He looked like he was just asking about the weather. The air between us went still for a moment. About what? I asked. You know what I'm talking about. Qin Feng chewed a piece of potato, swallowed, and then continued. I told you last night. Your style is wild. That works for low-level threats, but it won't be enough as you move up. If you want to keep going, you need to fix the foundation. I can teach you. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. On one condition. You follow my rules. No more of those messy skills. No shouting things like, "Wind, come to me," while we practice. And stop giving your moves those ridiculous names. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Are you always this serious when you eat? I asked. He didn't blink. I'm not serious about the food, but I know you're struggling with whether or not to ask for help. I'm just saving you the trouble of opening your mouth. He looked back down and continued eating. I sat there in silence for a while, then finally picked up my chopsticks and took a bite. When do we start? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon. 4:30. The empty space on the east side of the sports field. What are we practicing first? Loading the bow, he said. Basically, a horse stance. Right, I muttered. Doesn't sound very cool. Qin Feng ignored me. He stood up, picked up his tray, and turned to leave. Before he walked away, he threw one last sentence over his shoulder. Practice for a month, then tell me if it's cool. That is, if you can still stand up by then. He walked away, his pace steady as he disappeared into the crowd. I sat there and finished the last few bites of my rice. That voice in my head, the one insisting I would never beg him, had finally gone quiet. I dropped my tray at the return station and walked toward the cafeteria exit. The sun was out. The gloomy weather from yesterday had vanished, and the sunlight made the floor tiles outside the entrance look white and bleached. I stood there for a moment, letting the warmth hit me. My shoulder felt a little better than it did yesterday. I pulled out my notebook and found the line I had written about whether I should find him. I drew a thick line through it, crossing it out. Next to it, I wrote one word, yes. Sunday, for 20 p.m. I arrived at the east side of the field 10 minutes early. The sky was a brilliant blue, the wind was low, and the afternoon sun hit the concrete ground, making it feel warm. Qin Feng was already there. He was wearing a gray long-sleeved shirt and black sweatpants, leaning against a pull-up bar with a thermos in his hand. He saw me but didn't say anything. I need to cultivate the foundation of the earth, I said, looking him in the eye. I tried to make my voice sound solemn, like I was announcing something historic. You are the successor of this path. I acknowledge that you are qualified to guide me. Qin Feng stared at me in silence for 2 long seconds. Speak like a normal person, he said. I coughed. Teach me the basics. He set his thermos down on the base of the pull-up bar and nodded. Fine. Stand here. I walked over and stood in front of him. Left foot half a step forward, he commanded. Distance between your feet should be a bit wider than your shoulders. Push your knees outward. Don't let them collapse forward. Sit your waist down, like you're sitting on an invisible chair. He demonstrated the move. His body sank slightly, knees bent at a fixed angle, back straight as a board. His center of gravity looked like it was anchored to the ground by an invisible wire. Don't let your knees go past your toes. Don't arch your back. Hold it. The first 2 minutes weren't bad. My feet were planted firm, and my knees held the angle. After 3 minutes, my thighs started to ache. By 5 minutes, the ache turned into a violent tremble. I thought I was doing okay, so I looked up and asked, what is this move called? Jamabu. The horse stance. I frowned. No, I mean the name of the bow technique. Horse stance. The official name, I pressed. Like earth pillar bow or mountain river seat. Qin Feng looked down at me. It's just called a horse stance. My expression stiffened. I slowly stood up, pulled my notebook from my jacket pocket, and turned to a fresh page. I wrote in my most serious handwriting, asterisk foundation of the earth. Basic technique is asterisk. Qin Feng watched me write. His expression didn't change, but I saw his eyelid twitch ever so slightly. He recovered his calm quickly. Get back down. You're not done. I snapped the notebook shut and dropped back into the stance. I didn't ask about the name again. The sun began to tilt, stretching our shadows long across the concrete. My legs were shaking harder now, but I grit my teeth and refused to stand. Qin Feng leaned against the bar, checking his phone and occasionally glancing up to make sure my form wasn't breaking. It was quiet, save for the distant sound of someone running on the track. After about 8 minutes, my legs were vibrating uncontrollably. That's enough for your first time, Qin Feng said. stand up and move around. I stood up slowly. My thighs felt like they were filled with lead, heavy, sour, and throbbing. Does this actually improve my strength? Yes. Qin Feng unscrewed his thermos and took a sip of water. Right now, your spiritual energy is being carried by your raw talent. It's like a car running on a powerful engine, but with a loose chassis. The horse stance builds the chassis. Once that's stable, your energy transmission will be much more efficient. Will I be able to beat you in a month? I asked. He glanced at me. No, but you won't get knocked back 2 steps by a single punch like last time. I moved my legs around in silence. They were still burning, but I felt something, a sensation I hadn't noticed before. It felt like something inside me had been unlocked. Same time tomorrow, Qin Feng said. He picked up his thermos and left. The area by the bars felt empty again. I stood on the concrete and tried the stance one more time on my own. I held it for about 2 minutes before the shaking started again. It was hard, but I felt a little better than before. Same time tomorrow, I repeated. I took out my notebook and wrote, *second attempt. Horse stance duration, 2 minutes. Worse than before, *. That's not getting worse. Qin Feng's voice came from behind me. He was walking toward the exit, his thermos tucked under his arm. It's your first time. Your muscles haven't reacted yet. This is your actual baseline. I watched him walk away at a steady, unhurried pace. I turned back to my notebook and added a line under my last entry. Qin Feng says this isn't a setback. This is my true level. My true level is half as good as I thought. Must work harder. I closed the notebook, stood up, and dropped into the horse stance one last time. I didn't look at the time. I just held the position, letting the burn seep deep into my muscles until I physically couldn't stand it anymore. Someone shouted something in the distance. I looked back and saw a few students running, their shadows long and thin on the red track. I turned and started walking back to the dorms. My pace was a little slower than usual. My legs were still aching. After a few steps, I stopped and looked back at that empty patch of concrete. The bars and the ground were bathed in a deep, brassy sunset. It was very quiet. Same time tomorrow, I repeated to myself as I walked away. When I got back to the dorm, Chunwei was already deep into a game. He glanced up as I limped through the door. He looked me up and down, a smirk forming on his face. What's with the walk? You look like you've been crippled, he said. Training, I replied shortly. What kind of training turns your legs into jelly? You joining a circus? Horse stance. Chunwei went silent for a second. Then he snorted. Horse stance. You call that training? The old guy downstairs does Tai Chi every morning. Is he a martial arts god now? I didn't bother arguing. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I looked over the notes I'd taken on the earthly branch foundation techniques. Qin Feng's naming style was incredibly plain. I'd written down horse stance and underlined it. Below it, I added a new line. Too simple, but it works. After today's session, I felt the spiritual energy circulate through my legs. It felt clearer, less obstructed than before. My conclusion was simple. Keep practicing. I leaned back in my chair, my thighs still trembling. It wasn't exactly painful. It was more of a strange, buzzing sensation, like my muscles were being woken up after a long sleep. Outside, the orange glow of the sunset was fading. The light retreated from the field, shrinking toward the horizon. I sat there in the quiet and thought I could still hear the rhythmic footsteps of someone jogging in the distance. I closed my eyes. The last thing I saw in my mind was that blue-gray evening, standing on the concrete, shaking, while the warmth of the sun hit the ground. The next 5 days, from November 18th to the 22nd, were the most tedious of my life. Every afternoon at 4:30, I met Qin Feng at that empty patch of ground by the track. We followed a strict routine. Warm up, horse stance, rest, horse stance again. In between, he threw in physical drills. High knees, squat jumps, burpees. None of it felt like cultivation. What's this one called? I asked him during the high knees. High knees, he said. And this? I asked during the jumps. Squat jumps. After the 3rd time, I stopped asking. I just did the work. In my notebook, I started labeling them as unnamed basic physical exercises. Qin Feng's naming system was almost aggressively boring. On the 3rd day, he added something new, internal energy guidance. We stood facing each other about a meter apart. Qin Feng raised his right hand, palm toward me. He pushed his spiritual energy into his palm and signaled me to do the same. Push it to where? I asked. To my hand, he said. I focused. I felt the energy leave my chest and travel down my arm. It passed through my shoulder, my elbow, and my wrist. When it reached my palm, it gathered naturally. I pushed. The energy surged out, but as soon as it hit the air, it scattered. It became an irregular, misty cloud between us. Qin Feng watched the mist dissipate. You can't control the shape yet, he noted. How do I control it? Compress it in your palm first. Don't let it scatter. Focus it into a single point, then push. He raised his own hand to show me. I focused my spiritual perception on his palm. His energy wasn't a mist. It was tightly wound, like a thick hemp rope. Every strand was pressed against the next, forming a tiny, dense ball. When he pushed, the energy didn't spread. It flew through the air like a bullet, hitting me right in the chest. You see it? He asked. I see it, I said. It's twisted together. Qin Feng paused. Then you'll learn this quickly. His voice was flat, but I noticed he was a fraction slower in pulling his hand back. He couldn't see the energy with his eyes. He had to rely on pure sensation. But I could see it clearly. By the fourth day, I managed to compress the energy. It wasn't as tight as his rope, but it was a solid sphere. When I pushed, it stayed together for about 1.5 meters before breaking apart. It was a massive improvement over the first day's mist. By the 5th time I did it, Qin Feng nodded. You learn fast, but your stability is still weak. You have to stand firm before you can push far. My horse stance was getting better, too. On the 3rd day, I hit 5 minutes. On the 4th, I made it to 8. I felt proud of the progress, but Qin Feng just looked at my posture and frowned. Your waist is loose. Adjust. We didn't talk much during training. He didn't waste words, and after a few blunt answers, I stopped asking for the names of his secret techniques. But I noticed something. He always caught my posture failing the exact second it started to slip. He never waited for me to collapse before speaking up. You're actually a good teacher, I said while taking a water break. He glanced at me. You're actually a good student. Neither of us said anything after that. By the end of the 5th day, my legs weren't shaking as much. I could control the energy ball well enough to make it curve slightly mid-flight. I looked at my hands. The precision was night and day compared to a week ago. The accuracy comes from your base, Qin Feng said, packing up. Your foundation is stable now, so you're losing less energy during the transfer. Before, you were losing 30% of your power just moving it from your core to your hand. Now, it's maybe 10%. He stopped for a second. That wind ability of yours. If you increase your precision, you won't have to rely on brute force. You could use it to block a path or trap an opponent, instead of just hitting them head-on. I thought about it. He was right. Before, my wind blades were fire and forget. Whether they hit was mostly luck. Now, I could see a way to make them curve around obstacles. If I got even better, I could probably control 2 blades on different paths at the same time. I updated my notebook. Wind guidance updated. Range, 5 meters. Precision, significantly improved. Can now curve wind blades. Energy loss reduced from 30% to 10%. Next goal, simultaneous control of 2 paths. At the bottom, I added a small note. Qin Feng's methods are effective. Simple names, but the logic is sound. Stabilize the base before striking. Qin Feng was already heading out, his jacket slung over his shoulder. Tomorrow is Saturday. Take the day off. You're taking a break too? I asked. Your muscles won't recover if you don't rest. We continue the day after. He walked a few steps, then turned back. Starting next week, I'm increasing the difficulty. Be ready. I watched him go. Increasing the difficulty? I was curious, but I didn't ask. I'd find out soon enough. The sun had nearly set as I walked back. The streetlights flickered on, casting circles of orange light on the pavement. I pulled out my phone to check the date. November 22nd. A notification from the system was waiting for me. It was gray and collapsed, looking almost like an afterthought. Self-training progress, 18%. Wind guidance, precision mastered. I went to put the phone away, but the window didn't disappear. A smaller line of text floated up at the bottom. Warning, Frequency of anomalous energy fluctuations on campus has risen significantly compared to 2 weeks ago. Host is advised to remain alert. My pace slowed. The system notification flickered under the orange glow of a streetlight, and I stopped completely to read it again. Anomalous activity was rising. 2 weeks ago, right around the time I met Chin Feng, the supernatural occurrences on campus were sparse and disconnected. Now, the system was going out of its way to flag the increase. I looked toward the old teaching building. In the dark, the dusty, gray structure was nothing but a jagged silhouette. It looked closer than it had the first time I saw it. It felt like a giant holding its breath, crouching silently in the shadows of the East District. Over the next week, the pages of my notebook filled up fast. I added 5 new entries, each one a piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. On Monday night, I found a fluctuation near the scrap yard outside the East Gate. It lasted 40 minutes. The intensity was low, but the location was fixed. I stood at the mouth of the alley for 10 minutes, watching. I didn't move in. My rules had changed. I wasn't going to rush every anomaly I saw anymore. I needed to confirm their nature first. Tuesday morning, at 2 a.m., I caught 3 intermittent flashes behind the cafeteria trash bins. Each one lasted 5 minutes. The frequency was unstable. I sat in the shadows of the back wall, waiting. Once I was sure no spiritual residue remained, I left. Wednesday afternoon was different. As I walked past the south wall of the library's old archives, I caught a glimpse of something. It was a smear of dusty purple energy, about the size of a palm, stuck to the bricks. It looked like something had brushed against the wall and left a stain. The concentration was incredibly low, lower than any spirit or demon I'd ever encountered. It was almost negligible. By Thursday evening, I was under the bleachers of the North Sports Field. I found an irregular clump of spiritual energy there, looking like a crumpled ball of paper. It felt similar to the wild spirit I'd seen outside the North Gate. No core, no structure, just a loose, sluggish mess. I poked it with a wind blade. It dissolved instantly. Friday night took me to the edge of the Tsui housing complex. About 100 meters south of the North Gate, I felt a vibration similar to the Dreamstone Demon. It was weak and centered around a manhole cover. By the time I arrived, the energy was gone. Only a small, damp patch remained on the pavement. Back in my room, I plotted all 5 points onto my anomaly map. I used different colored pens to mark the times, locations, and traits. I leaned back in my chair, studying the web I'd drawn. Patterns were emerging. Before, these were just random dots on a page. Now, they were starting to connect. The scrap yard at the East Gate sat perfectly on a line extending from the old office building to the North Gate. The cafeteria bins and the library wall were almost perfectly aligned. The energy under the bleachers was a near match for the spirit at the North Gate. This wasn't random. I picked up my pen and drew a few auxiliary lines. One line ran west to east through the north-central part of campus, connecting the cafeteria, library, and the old buildings. Another branched off from the North Gate toward the housing complex like a tributary splitting from a main river. The new points, the scrap yard and the cafeteria wall, fell right near the intersection of these lines. I counted them again. 5 in 1 week. That didn't even include the tiny, micro fluctuations I'd sensed while walking to class. Before this, I was lucky to find one a week. At the bottom of the map, I scribbled a note, * frequency rising, cause unknown, possibilities. 1. Overall spiritual density is increasing naturally. 2. Someone is manually creating or activating these anomalies. 3. Both, *. As soon as I finished the last word, the system window flared to life. It was a dark blue notification, framed like an official bulletin. * system warning. Anomalous energy density in the host vicinity has risen by 37% over the last 7 days. Current level, moderately high. Recommendation, maintain night patrols. Confirm target nature before engagement. 37%. That number felt ominous. I reached for my pen to add the figure to my notes, but a second window popped up. This one was shorter, the font bolder and bone white. It looked less like a notification and more like a process data packet. Reward issued, mystery box. Content. Effect will manifest naturally at the appropriate time. I stared at the 3 question marks for 5 seconds. What kind of effect? I muttered. The system didn't answer. I tried a different approach. Is it an ability or a support tool? Small gray text appeared. Reward content fixed upon issuance. Trigger conditions, unknown. Current status, pending activation. What does pending activation mean? Reward will take effect automatically once the host meets specific conditions. Current conditions, unknown. No further information available. I swallowed my next question. The system wasn't being stubborn, it just wasn't time yet. Either it didn't know, or it wasn't allowed to tell me. I looked at my hands. I felt the same. My spiritual flow was normal. My wind guidance worked fine. My soul-suppressing roar cooldown hadn't changed. Nothing was different. And yet, I now possessed something hidden in an invisible box, waiting for a moment I couldn't predict. I opened my notebook and added a final entry for the night. Asterisk NOV 29th. Received first mystery box reward. Content, effect, and triggers unknown. Status, stored/pending, asterisk. I didn't get up immediately. I stared at the map. The cafeteria, the library, the old office building, the teaching building. That line of activity was glowing under my desk lamp. I pressed my fingertips against the star-shaped markers on the paper. A 37% jump in activity and a mysterious reward. It could be a coincidence, but the timing felt too perfect. I walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights carved the road into patches of light and shadow. Far off, the old teaching building was a sunken weight in the deepest part of the night. I grabbed my jacket and checked my phone. 11:07 p.m. I stepped out of my room, keeping my pace steady. I wanted to look like I was just going for a walk or grabbing a drink. But my feet took me toward the east gate. As I approached the scrapyard, I noticed one of the streetlights had gone out. The light dimmed by half as I walked over to take a look. The damp patches on the ground had already dried up, leaving nothing behind. The world around me was silent, save for the occasional hum of a car in the distance. I stood there for a long time, waiting, but the spiritual fluctuations had completely vanished. No new traces appeared. I pulled my gaze away and started the walk back to the dorm. When I reached the building, I glanced up at the 3rd floor. The curtains were drawn, but the lights were on. Shinkai was still glued to his computer. I stayed downstairs for a few extra seconds, replaying that sensation in my mind. I didn't have any concrete proof, just a nagging, indescribable feeling. It felt like someone had been watching me from a long way off. By early December, the air in Yefeng had turned biting. I pulled my zipper all the way to my chin and walked alone along the eastern perimeter wall, heading toward the old teaching building. The streetlights grew sparse the further east I went. Only 1 out of every 3 or 4 was actually working. The light hit the pavement in broken patches, looking like shattered pieces of the moon. I hadn't planned on coming out tonight, but Qin Feng had a guest and canceled our training session at the last minute. I had gone back to the dorm after dinner, flipping through my anomaly map. When I saw the marker for the old teaching building, I couldn't sit still. That question mark had been hanging over my head for 2 months. It was time to settle it. I arrived at the edge of the grounds around 9 o'clock. Only one streetlight remained lit near the outer wall, casting a narrow, dim glow. I stopped right where the light met the dark and spread my spiritual sense. My body went rigid. Behind the dusty, peeling walls of the old building, a mass of deep, ugly darkness was floating. It was thicker than the night itself, hanging off the structure like a heavy black shroud. The edges of it were rippling. The density and weight of this energy were unlike anything I had ever encountered. A stone dream demon was just a puff of gray mist. A pond spirit was just a loose cluster of energy. But this? The entire building was wrapped in dark spiritual aura. It was as if the building itself was a living entity. The concentration was all wrong. I whispered the words to myself as I moved closer to the wall. The darkness became clearer. It wasn't spread evenly. Some spots were thin, but others were dense. The thickest area was near a south-facing window on the 1st floor. There, the darkness had almost solidified, looking like black sludge smeared against the glass. I ducked behind an old locust tree and pushed my spiritual perception to its limit. The texture of this energy was tighter and slower than anything I'd seen, rolling like thick, heavy oil. Then, I saw movement behind the glass. It was a silhouette at least twice the size of a stone dream demon. Its shape was shifting, but it had the bulk of a curled-up beast. It sat beneath the windowsill, its body rising and falling with the rhythm of its breath. It wasn't moving, it was resting. My mind raced. This wasn't a stone dream demon, it was much stronger. And it wasn't an intruder, it belonged here. It had come from inside the building. Before I could finish the thought, the thing moved. A dark outline spilled out of the window like ink, seeping silently through the cracks in the frame. As soon as it hit the ground, it began to change. The scattered energy pulled together, forming a solid shape about half the height of a man. It stood on 4 legs, looking like a horribly elongated dog. I took a half step back. The thing snapped its head in my direction. It knew I was there. I didn't hesitate. I gathered wind guidance in my palm and fired a blade of air straight at its head. The blade sank about 3 centimeters in and stopped, as if I had tried to cut through a thick block of rubber. The spot where I hit it dented for a second, then immediately smoothed over. It was like I hadn't hit it at all. The creature lunged. I dove to the side, feeling it brush past my left arm. It landed, spun around, and charged again. As I dodged the second time, I fired another wind blade, aiming for its lower torso where the energy looked thinner. The blade cut deeper this time, about 5 centimeters. A small crack appeared in its spiritual structure, but it sealed shut in less than a second. It wasn't deep enough. I tried to back away to create space and recharge, but the thing was relentless. Its third lunge was faster than the others. I was half a beat too slow. Its claws grazed my right shoulder, tearing through my jacket and my shirt. It left a long, shallow gash in my skin. It stung, but then a wave of ice hit the wound. The cold began to seep deep into my flesh. Spiritual erosion. My breathing hitched, and the energy in my palm flickered. The wind blade I was forming wavered. The creature landed and turned for the kill. I didn't wait to recover my stance. I unleashed the soul-suppressing roar. I pushed the energy from my chest, through my throat, and poured every ounce of my strength into a single word. Break! The shockwave slammed into the creature's head at point-blank range. Its entire form shuddered violently. The silhouette froze for half a second, as if it had been caught in a trap. Half a second was all I needed. I lunged forward, slamming my right palm directly into the center of its torso. I drove my spiritual power into the weakest point of its structure, like a hammer driving a nail. The entire thing exploded from the inside out. Shards of dark energy flew in every direction, fading as they hit the air. All that remained was a small, damp stain on the ground. I dropped to a crouch, gasping for air. The wound on my shoulder was still radiating that unnatural cold. I reached up to touch it. There wasn't much blood, but the edges of the cut were dark, deeper than a normal bruise. I stood up and pulled my jacket tight to hide the injury, then walked to the window. The space behind the glass was empty now, leaving only a thin film of dark residue. I watched the energy flow slowly across the inside of the pane. I couldn't see anything else in the darkness, but I knew one thing for sure. That thing hadn't been lured here. It hadn't wandered in from somewhere else. It was a part of this building. The building itself was the source. I turned and started the walk back. The cold was still seeping from the wound, and with every step I took, my shoulder throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. I walked toward the flickering streetlight. I had only taken 2 steps when a figure emerged from the shadows on the other side. It was Su-won. She was wearing a gray jacket and a white scarf, holding a plastic bag in her hand. Her expression didn't change when she saw me, but her eyes lingered on my right shoulder for a second before meeting my gaze. "The wound on your shoulder is getting worse," she said. That was the first thing out of her mouth. I looked down. The fabric of my jacket was darker there, and the stain was slowly spreading. I pressed my fingers against it and felt a cold, dark liquid. I told her it was fine, just a small injury. "Wounds caused by spiritual erosion don't heal on their own," Su-won replied. She told me that if I didn't deal with it, she would have to drag me back herself. I pulled my hand away, staring at the dark fluid on my fingertips. I asked her how she knew it was spiritual erosion. She didn't answer immediately. She just told me to follow her. She turned and headed toward the girls' dormitory. When I hesitated, she looked back over her shoulder. She asked if I was being a chauvinist or if I just planned to stand there until I bled out. I stayed silent for a moment and then followed. Behind us, the old building sat quietly in the night. That open window looked like a cracked door, waiting for someone to push it open again. Suwon led me to a spot behind an abandoned convenience store at the edge of the East District. There was a sealed wall and a concrete ledge that was just high enough to sit on. She placed her plastic bag down and started arranging things with clinical precision. A small bottle of dark liquid, gauze, and medical tape. She laid them out in reverse order of use. She told me to take off my jacket and expose my shoulder. When I pulled the fabric away, I saw the damage for myself. The cut was about 2 fingers wide. It wasn't deep, but the edges were dark and discolored, like bruised blood seeping out. Suwon unscrewed the bottle. A faint herbal scent filled the air. She dipped a cotton swab into the liquid and looked at me. She warned me it would hurt and told me not to scream, because no one would hear me anyway. Then she pressed the swab directly onto the wound. My entire body tensed up instantly. It was cold. It felt like hundreds of tiny needles were stabbing into the cut. Suwon didn't stop. She moved the swab at a steady pace. She told me that if I hadn't acted tough and walked those extra steps, it wouldn't hurt half as much now. She warned me that if I left it, the infection would spread by tomorrow, and my arm would swell up thicker than my leg. She flipped the swab and dipped it again. She asked what I had used to wipe the wound earlier. I told her I used my sleeve. She glanced at the dark stain on my jacket and told me to throw the coat away. The spiritual residue wouldn't fade for at least half a month. I wanted to argue, but she was already finished with the second coat of medicine. As she pulled her hand back, she pressed her fingertips around the edges of the wound. Her touch was lighter this time, as if she were checking for something. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was confirming that the erosion hadn't spread past my shoulder. She capped the bottle and told me that while the wound looked scary, it hadn't hit the foundation yet. If it had been 2 centimeters deeper, I wouldn't have been sleeping tonight. I asked her if she knew how to treat these kinds of injuries. She said she didn't, but it was still better than me wiping the wound with my sleeve. She packed her things and sat down next to me. The moonlight shone down, casting a pale gray glow on the ground between us. I told her she shouldn't be out at this hour. She looked at me and said the same applied to me, except I looked like I had even less business being there. At least she brought medicine. All I had brought was a ruined jacket. She guessed that I had gone to the old teaching building because I was bored and wanted to see what was inside. She asked what I found. I told her it was a spirit, something a bit larger than the last one I encountered. She tilted her head and said she knew she was right. I didn't respond. I pulled my jacket back over my shoulder. The icy coldness was fading, replaced by the medicine soaking into my skin. I told her her technique was professional. She looked away toward the shadows of the trees. She told me my way of handling anomalies was extremely unprofessional. I asked her what she meant. She said my fighting style was reckless and relied too much on brute force. She told me that if she hadn't been passing by, I'd be sitting there bleeding or paralyzed on the ground. She spoke with a calm indifference, as if she were talking about the weather. She told me my life looked expensive and I shouldn't waste it like that. I went quiet for a moment. I asked her if she had fought these things before. She said she had handled a few, but not like I did. She at least prepared medicine beforehand. She pointed out that I didn't even wear a protective charm and walked into that building like I was going to the supermarket. I looked down at my ruined jacket and asked why she was there in the first place. She claimed she was just passing by. I pointed out that people don't usually pass by old buildings late at night carrying specialized medicine. Suwon stood up and brushed the dust off her pants. She said she kept the medicine in her bag because she had common sense. She told me the wound was treated, but I needed to change the dressing tomorrow. If I kept pushing myself, I'd end up crippled. She turned to leave, then stopped. She added that she wasn't helping me out of concern. She just didn't want me to mess up and drag her down. If something happened to me, the school would investigate the building and find out she had been nearby. It would be a hassle. She walked away, her shadow stretching long under the streetlights until she disappeared around the corner. I sat on the concrete ledge for a while, thinking about what she said. The medicine was working well. The dark edges of the wound had receded significantly. I stood up to leave, but then my system window flickered. It wasn't like the usual display. The text was distorted, flashing and disappearing like a broken signal. The words were fragments. Wind. It's in the cracks. No, not a crack. It's a concept. The wind knows. 10 meters. No, just 10. Leave now, or don't. Insufficient data. I stared at the flickering words until the window shut down entirely, like a candle blown out by the wind. Then, the system rebooted. The text was clear again. It reported that the spiritual concentration in the area had exceeded normal limits, causing a brief fluctuation in the translation engine. It told me not to worry. I didn't entirely believe it. I recorded the anomaly in my notes and put the book away. My shoulder didn't hurt anymore, replaced by a slight tugging sensation as the wound began to close. I started walking, but then I stopped again, looking back at the darkness. I thought about what Soo-won said before she left. She had asked if I would contact her if something happened, but her tone was flat, almost indifferent. It was like she was stating a fact that had already occurred rather than expressing concern. She didn't want me to drag her down. Whether she was telling the truth or not, the way she handled my wound was professional. It definitely wasn't her first time treating a spiritual injury. She had come prepared with medicine specifically for this. I wasn't sure if she just happened to be passing by or not, but one thing was certain. Soo-won was no ordinary student. At that same moment, in a room in the girls' dormitory, Soo-won sat at her desk. Her phone was open to a messaging app with no names or profile pictures. She sent a brief, clinical report. It detailed the target's location near the old teaching building at 10:40 p.m., the encounter with an unknown mid-level monster, and the successful elimination of the threat. She noted the target's light injuries and the application of healing ointment. Her conclusion was clear. The target's combat ability was higher than previously assessed. She recommended accelerating the contact plan. The final note mentioned the need to establish a more stable connection with it next time. Wednesday morning, second period, ancient literature. I sat in the third row from the back, near the window. My textbook was open, but my eyes were focused on Soo-won. She sat a few rows ahead of me. She wore a cream-colored light jacket today, her sleeves pushed up to her forearms. I activated my spiritual vision. The pale silver-gray aura around her was clearer than before. The edges were smooth, like polished metal. I pushed my vision further, trying to see deeper. The spiritual energy lines inside her were dense and moved with incredible speed. The circuit from her shoulder to her arm was a perfect, flowing loop. There were no blockages. I compared her flow to mine. My lines were scattered and turbulent, like boiling water. Hers were tight and disciplined. I tried to focus even deeper, aiming for her chest area. Suddenly, a tiny thread of spiritual energy snapped out from her neck like a plucked guitar string. It swept toward me, feeling like a door being slammed shut from the inside. Soo-won's pen paused for half a second. Then, she continued writing. I pulled my vision back immediately. That brief contact told me everything. Her spiritual structure was far denser and more stable than mine. It had been compressed and refined many times over. I opened my notebook and wrote under Soo-won's name. I noted the high density and perfect flow of her energy. My preliminary judgment was that her level was at least one full stage higher than mine. I closed the book and looked up. She was still writing, looking like any other student paying attention to a lecture. When the bell rang, I packed my things to leave. Soo-won was already standing by my desk. She moved faster than last time. Because she was standing and I was sitting, she looked down at me with that same cold expression. "Don't go to the old teaching building alone anymore," she said. The wording and the pauses were identical to the last time she warned me. Then she added, "Did you change the dressing on your wound?" I looked up at her and told her I had, and that the ointment worked well. She cut me off. She said she wasn't asking out of concern. She just wanted to make sure the wound didn't worsen and become a burden to others. She told me to find her if anything felt wrong and not to force myself. I leaned back in my chair, turning her words over in my head. "Don't go alone." I asked her why. She didn't hesitate, telling me the place wasn't safe. I reminded her that last time she said someone told her that. I asked if it was the same this time. She looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "This time too." She didn't explain further, but she didn't leave either. Her silence was a message in itself. If she wanted to lie, she could have made up a better excuse. Instead, she chose not to answer, signaling that she had said all she was allowed to say. I told her I understood. She glanced at me, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. I sat there, tapping my fingers on my notebook. She hadn't told. The distinction was subtle but important. I opened my notebook again and added a new line. Second warning during break. Wording consistent, hinting that someone should accompany me. I drew a line under it and added a question mark before putting the book away. As I walked out of the building, a chilly wind hit my face. I pulled up my collar. My shoulder barely hurt now, just a slight tugging sensation. Her medicine was the real deal. On my way to the cafeteria, I kept dissecting the conversation. The first time, she said someone told me. This time, she said also. That meant she was still receiving information from an outside source. And her phrasing had shifted from don't go to don't go alone. With someone like her, every word was deliberate. I stopped at the cafeteria steps and looked toward the old teaching building. In the bright noon sun, it looked like a harmless, dusty relic. But I knew better. I went inside, grabbed a tray, and replayed the whole interaction while I ate. Her logic was pragmatic. I was a liability if I got hurt. But there was something else beneath the surface. Her expression was a mask that never slipped, making it impossible to see her true intent. I had no more classes that afternoon, but my mind was far from resting. I sat at my desk back in the dorm. My shoulder didn't hurt much anymore, but I still flipped my notebook open to the page I'd dedicated to Soo-won. I wrote down every detail from our meeting. I analyzed her phrasing, the length of her pauses, and the exact direction she looked before she turned away. At the very bottom of the page, I scribbled one final thought. She is warning me. Why? By mid-December, the night wind felt like needles against my skin. I pulled my zipper to the top and walked along the asphalt road on the east side of campus. It had become a habit, and every night after 11 p.m., I went out for a patrol. I couldn't get into the old teaching building yet, so I stuck to the perimeter. Chinfeng always said training required daily practice, and I felt patrolling was the same. As I reached the corner of the sports field, I stopped. A figure was walking toward me from the crossroad. Their pace was steady, neither fast nor slow. The streetlight hit them from above, casting a soft glow on the hem of a gray coat. It was Soo-won. She didn't speed up when she saw me. She just kept her rhythm until she stood directly under the light. Patrolling again? She asked as she approached. You too, I replied. Soo-won didn't deny it. She just shifted a plastic bag to her other hand. How's the wound? Better, I said. That ointment really worked. Of course it did, she said flatly. Why else would I carry it around? She glanced toward the direction I'd come from. Did you just come from the old teaching building? No, I did a lap around it, but I didn't get close. She looked at me, looking like she wanted to say something but held back. After a second of silence, she spoke. Lately, how do you know? Your walk is steadier than before, Soo-won said. Last time I saw you, your steps were loose. Now, you land heavier. Someone's teaching you. I thought about it for a second. You could say that. Who? You wouldn't know them. She didn't press for details. She acted like she didn't care. Fine, just watch yourself. She turned to leave, but after 2 steps, she stopped. She looked back at me, the moonlight carving out the sharp profile of her face. You're not an ordinary student, are you? Her voice was lighter than I'd ever heard it. It sounded like a casual question, but I knew it wasn't. I stood on the other side of the lamp, my shadow stretching long across the pavement. I kept my voice just as light. Neither are you. The corner of Soo-won's mouth twitched into a tiny smile. It was faint, like a ripple on a still pond. She had seen my reaction in that half-second, and she didn't deny it. She didn't claim to be ordinary, and she didn't change the subject. She just smiled, as if confirming something she already knew. Neither of us pushed further. We were like 2 cars meeting at an intersection, honking once, and then driving off in opposite directions. Her gray silhouette flickered between the streetlights until she turned a corner and vanished. I stood there for a moment, replaying her words. Not an ordinary student. That description fit her perfectly, but it fit me even better. When I got back to the dorm, Chun-kai was already asleep. The room was dark, save for a sliver of light leaking in from the hallway. I sat at my desk and clicked on my lamp, keeping the brightness at its lowest setting. I opened my notebook and recorded the conversation. Then, I looked at the bottom of Soo-won's page and listed the possibilities of who she really was. Evidence, systematic training, specific habits, experienced in handling anomalies, has an outside source of intel. Doubt. If she were with an organization, she wouldn't warn me to stay away. She'd use me to get info. Possibility 2. Descendant of a hidden family. Evidence. Highly dense spiritual structure. Higher level than me. Clear signs of heritage. Very guarded way of speaking. Doubt. Still uncertain. I closed the notebook and pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the moonlight. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop wondering where she learned those things. That ointment recipe wasn't something you could just buy, and her first aid skills weren't from a YouTube video. And that question, asterisk, you're not an ordinary student, asterisk, she had known the answer for a long time. I rolled over and pulled the blanket tight. I thought about the strange fragments the system had given me near the old building. I hadn't figured them out yet, but I'd written them down. I felt like there was a connection between those fragments and tonight's conversation, something hidden behind a veil I couldn't see through yet. Just as I was drifting off, a window flashed in my mind. It wasn't the usual white-on-black notification. It was a pale gray, minimalist interface. I opened my eyes. In the darkness, the text floated there like an automated customer service reply. Asterisk, your inquiry has been received. Ticket number 2024-102-9001. Subject: Old Teaching Building Underground Structure and Anomaly Status. Status: Processing. Estimated response time: Cannot be calculated. Thank you for your patience. Asterisk. I stared at the words "cannot be calculated" for a long time. I had asked the system about the basement before, and it hadn't answered. It turned out it was actually working on it. It just took time. I memorized the ticket number, planning to write it down in the morning. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. I turned toward the wall and closed my eyes. The ticket number 2024-102-9001 burned in my mind. October 29th. That was the day I first asked. It had been processing since then. My eyelids grew heavy, and the gray text faded into the dark. At the same time, in the girls' dormitory, Suwon leaned against her headboard. The glow of her phone lit her pale face as she typed into her notes. Mid-December. Encountered Lin Yuan at the field. Confirmed target is aware. No information disclosed yet. Warning for the old building repeated. Next contact. When new anomaly signals appear, he will come looking for me. She paused, then added one last line. He smiled when he said, neither are you. It wasn't natural, but it was acceptable. She flipped her phone face down. The room went dark. A single sliver of moonlight squeezed through the curtains, landing silently on the floor. A thin line of moonlight cut through the darkness of the room. Suwon rolled over, pulling the quilt up to her shoulders. The direction of the old teaching building was deathly silent. Outside the window, tree branches swayed slowly in the wind, casting restless, dancing shadows against the wall. Meanwhile, I sat at my desk. The wind wasn't strong, but cold air squeezed through the cracks in the window frame, thread by thread. It carried that dry, biting chill unique to winter. I flicked my desk lamp to its brightest setting. My black leather notebook lay open in front of me. I started flipping from the very first page. That page held my general outline for the world setting. The handwriting was much messier back then, as if I had been in a frantic rush to pour the thoughts out of my head. I scanned a few lines. Spiritual recovery is an irreversible process. The barriers are thinning. The chosen ones will awaken now. I had drawn 2 thick lines under that sentence, adding a small lightning bolt symbol next to it. I clearly remembered being very satisfied with that phrasing at the time. I flipped through a few more pages, reaching my spiritual perception training logs. May, June, July, August. Every single entry read, no progress today. Still can't sense anything. Might need to change locations. One entry had a note in the margin that simply said, too much text. Retreating for today. I looked at that note and let out a small laugh before turning the page. I lingered longer on the anomaly distribution map. This page was already crowded. The cafeteria, the library, the old office building, the alley outside the north gate, Suwei housing complex, and the old teaching building. I had connected these locations with lines of different colors. The margins were packed with dates and observations. I counted them up. From September to December, I had recorded 11 anomaly points. Most of them had their natures confirmed, but the section for the old teaching building was still mostly blank. I had only written one line at the bottom, to be confirmed. I flipped to the character profiles. Chen Kai, Wang Yu, Qin Feng, Su Wan. Beneath each name was a paragraph of observations. Chen Kai's was the shortest, only 2 lines. Ordinary human. Strong complaining skills. Trustworthy. Under Wang Yu, I had written, President of the Paranormal Research Society. Driven by social practice credits. No spiritual perception. 0 threat. Qin Feng's section took up half a page. I had recorded everything from our first encounter in the basement to our sparring matches. The last line read, possible collaborator. But things must be done by his rules. Su Wan's section filled nearly an entire page. I had logged the sports meet stands, our talk in ancient literature class, the first contact outside the old teaching building, and her treating the students' wounds behind the abandoned convenience store. I even noted her comment at the corner of the field. You aren't an ordinary student, are you? I used different colored pens to underline key information, marking the priorities. Asterisk identity unknown. Spiritual level higher than mine. Knows about the old building but won't talk. Has some eccentric habits. Says things like, I'm not worried about you. But her actions are actually quite caring. Asterisk. I paused after writing that, then moved to the next page, Strengths and Weaknesses Summary. My strengths were clear. My spiritual vision range was now about 150 meters. My wind element guidance reached 5 meters, and I could control 2 points simultaneously with significantly improved precision. Soul-suppressing roar was an effective crowd control tool with a 120-second cooldown. I had verified its effectiveness in actual combat. I also had a slight shadow resistance, improving my tolerance to dark attribute attacks by about 5%. My physical fitness was up by 3%, and my reactions were slightly faster than an average person's. Overall training progress sat at 22%. Qin Feng said my improvement speed was fast. Then there were the weaknesses. My foundation was the biggest issue. Qin Feng told me my spiritual power was like a building without a basement. It looked tall, but it wobbled if you touched it. I had been practicing horse stances for 2 weeks. It helped, but it wasn't nearly enough. My experience was also lacking. I'd been dealing with anomalies for less than 3 months. My battle count was too low, and I wasn't fast enough at making judgments when facing mid-tier threats. Then there was I still didn't know what was under the old teaching building. I didn't know the system's true identity or its stance. I didn't even know what it was doing during those maintenance periods. The biggest problem was the translation delay. The information I saw through spiritual vision required a 1.6-second delay for the system to translate. My fight with Qin Feng proved that those 0.6 seconds of lag could be fatal in a real fight. My proposed solution was to try skipping the translation entirely and understanding the raw spiritual information directly. Current progress, 0%. I reviewed the known factions. Qin Feng was the heir to the Qin family's legacy. We could cooperate for now. Su Wan was an unknown high-level entity with plenty of info she refused to share. The system was a stable tool, but it was unpredictable, dropping blind boxes and speaking in fragments. Then there was the Research Society and Chen Kai, ordinary people unaware of the truth. Finally, there were the potential threats I hadn't touched yet, the people behind Su Wan, the Qin family behind Qin Feng, and other hidden cultivators on campus. After finishing these notes, I turned to a blank page. In the very center, I used larger letters than usual to write one final thought. The world is bigger than I thought.